And in this video, we're going to take a look at some of the trial points put forward by the defence before the cross-examination in court of Darren Nichols. When we take a look at this document, it's pretty clear to see here that the defence are putting forward a case for Darren Nichols to have far more involvement in these murders than we are led to believe. Let's now start with that document, the trial points from the defence.
So firstly, let's start with quite an interesting piece that the barrister's written down here in the trial points. And it's actually something that I've made quite a few videos on. He actually starts talking about what the plan was that evening to kill Tucker, Tate and Rolfe. Because we were told originally that when Michael Steele got to the bottom of the lane, he was surprised by the gate being locked. Supposedly, the Range Rover was to continue into the field beyond the gate, where they would later be executed. And I always found that quite odd, because it would make the situation a lot more dangerous for whoever killed them, and really it would make the job of killing three men in a large open field a lot more difficult than if the gate was actually locked, if that makes sense. And what he's actually written down here is quite interesting. The barrister's written down, there's an old saying, a murderer always returns to the scene of the crime. Has Nichols been subject to observation at the murder scene, which brings him initially into the frame? Now, I guess what they're trying to say here is, was Darren Nichols monitored, or was he under some sort of surveillance where he was seen near the crime scene or reattending the crime scene after this crime had taken place? Now, this is something I'm going to go into more detail later on in the video. I did actually plan to speak about this towards the end. But what we know is that Darren Nichols was under surveillance from January 1996, and that just so happens to be when he comes into contact with the corrupt officer, DC Jim. Now, just to clarify something I've just said, which is actually incorrect, there isn't any evidence to say that Darren Nichols was under surveillance in January 1996, but what leads that to be an extremely strong possibility is that the phone records and all of the transcripts and all of the sort of putting the dots together, if you like, regarding this triple murder starts in January 1996. This is when Darren Nichols is calling the corrupt officer. This is when those tapes are recorded. So you must believe, you have to believe, that Darren Nichols' name has come up in January 1996, and his name will have been put forward as a strong suspect for the triple murders. So I guess this is what the barrister is saying here. Was Darren Nichols under some sort of surveillance, and did he return to the scene of the crime? It is also worth remembering that when the police put the pieces of the puzzle together and they see Darren Nichols' telephone number, they see who's been in contact with who, Darren Nichols, Michael Steele and Jack Womes. If the police didn't have any sort of background or any idea who Darren Nichols was originally, for all they knew, he could have been a hitman. So they would have taken him extremely seriously. They would have seen his name popping up. They would have seen his contact with DC Jim, who was also under investigation for being a corrupt police officer. Now, there's no way, there's no way they would have taken Darren Nichols lightly when his name and all of this circumstantial evidence, such as the phone records, came to light. He would have been a prime suspect, hence the reason he was actually charged with murder during his first police interview. Now, to put this in the most basic term possible, when Darren Nichols came to the attention of the police, when they realised that he was in touch with Michael Steele, Jack Womes, he was in the area when the murders took place. The important thing to remember is that they didn't know in what capacity his involvement was, other than being in the area at the time of the murders and connected to both Steele and Womes. So for all that they knew, he could have been a hitman, he could have been someone who was completely off of their radar, unless they knew half the story of who this person was and who he was actually involved with, i.e. DC Jim. So the fact that Darren Nichols does come across as, a driver, a gopher, whatever you want to call it, when his name come to the attention of the police, they would have taken it extremely seriously, at least to start with. Now, the barrister then goes on to almost give his own sort of theory, or a different theory, on the murders themselves. When talking about Darren Nichols, he has written down here the following. The idea, he tells us, is to get them into the field, out of the lane. Where then is the assassin likely to conceal himself? Or was the assassin in the vehicle, perhaps with one man dead already, intent on dumping the body into a lake, then surprise the other two when arriving at the gate? We must not forget where the spent cartridges are found. You will of course notice Nichols claims the gate is locked in the interview. He never mentions chained or padlocked. Now, we were told, or we have been told for quite some time, that Darren Nichols' sort of conversation with Michael Steele went along the lines of Michael Steele saying to him, well, we got down the lane, I didn't know what we were going to do. The gate was locked. I thought the gate was going to be open. I had no idea where Jack was. And then Jack just appeared from the bushes and started shooting them. Now, the barristers picked up on this here. The fact that if they had have driven past the gate into that open field, where was the gunman going to be hiding? That's completely crazy. I can't imagine Michael Steele and Darren Nichols ever had this conversation. Now, has Darren Nichols seen the news coverage? Has he seen the gate which was shut? And is Darren Nichols kind of imparting his own truth into the story here, trying to add credibility to what he is actually saying? The barrister uses a good line, right? I'm not sure if I can remember it word for word, but he says that Darren Nichols basically blends fact with fiction. He will tell you a little piece of factual information and then a lot of fictional information in order to try and add credence and credibility to whatever he is saying. The barrister then goes on to write the following. If the alleged cocaine deal was just a ploy, what would be the purpose of assessing whether an aircraft could land in this field? Nichols' lack of aviation knowledge unmasks him as a fraud. A pilot would glean little satisfaction out of flying over a site to assess suitability for landing, except in an emergency, if it were possible. The site would have to be physically inspected. It could well be a bog for all you could tell from a closed cockpit. Nichols does not describe a pilot's attitude or view, merely a non-aviator's fabrication. So really what the barrister is saying here, what he is picking up on, is the fact that by driving down that lane, you're not going to actually gain any information on where a plane, could land. We know that those fields, although they appear quite large to the naked eye, they aren't anywhere near large enough to be able to land a light aircraft, let alone take off again. So what would be the purpose of travelling down there to look at a supposed airstrip which doesn't even exist, or a field which isn't even anywhere near big enough to accommodate a light aircraft? The barrister, what he is saying here in as many words is, what would the point be in travelling down that lane in the pitch black without any torches, without any sort of real clothing enable them to sort of go into those fields and have a real good look around? It really didn't serve any purpose at all to be there that evening. The barrister has then written the following, which is quite interesting as it does give a discrepancy between two versions of events, or two versions of the story, shall we say. He has written down here the following. Nichols claims that the bait is 5 kilos of cocaine compared to with Donna Jagger's statement of 30 kilos of cocaine. So obviously there's a massive difference here between these two people's version of events. Now obviously Donna Jagger's was the common law wife of one of the deceased men, Craig Rolfe. And in her statement, she believed it was 30 kilos of cocaine. And Nichols then claims that it was actually 5 kilos that was going to be flown in. So there's obviously a massive discrepancy here. Not that it really means anything, but it's interesting that there isn't any sort of syncing of, the version of events. If you had two people who weren't really known to each other, who both knew that a deal was going down involving 30 kilos of cocaine, then that's a lot more believable than one person saying it's 5 kilos and another person saying it was 30. The barrister then goes on to talk about the getaway vehicle used for this triple murder. And he then describes something which I have mentioned countless times in my previous videos. And I'll just read this out to you. These are his words. He has actually written here, "What we are expected to believe is that two intelligent men plan a professional assassination of copybook proportion, then decide to use a worn-out VW Passat with leaking exhaust system and its torque converter leaking oil, which is why Nichols dumped the vehicle in the first place. As a last resort, they then dupe Nichols into driving them to and from a murder scene, regardless of false plates." Now, to give you a little bit more of my input on this regarding the false plates, this is actually something that was, brought to my attention by one of the viewers of this channel, and he makes an extremely valid point here. We know that Jack Wombs, engineering is his passion. It's something that he's extremely passionate about. It's something that he has a great deal of knowledge in. Now, for one moment, can you imagine if Jack Wombs tries to attach these false plates? It's damp, it's cold, it's wet. these number plates don't stick. Now, can you imagine that someone who takes engineering, you know, obviously sticking number plates onto a car doesn't take much engineering, but just imagine the sort of thought process of an engineer for a moment. He would be wiping down the surface, he would make it dry, he would reattach a bit more double-sided tape. He would get these plates to stick. He's not an idiot. He would get these plates to stick one way or another. Even if he was committing a crime far less than murder, these plates, they would have been stuck on somehow. They would have been attached to this vehicle in some way or another. But Darren Nichols' version of events for the evening of December the 6th is that Jack tries to stick the number plates, it's wet. Darren Nichols then says to him, "They won't stick, silly, it's wet." And he simply discards the number plates in the back of the vehicle. Now, this isn't congruent, and this doesn't tie in with what we know of Jack Womes the person. He would have just dried the surface down, he would have cleaned the surface, and if he didn't have any more tape, he would have found a way of getting those number plates onto the vehicle. We are led to believe that this person who takes engineering and working on vehicles so seriously, it really is his sort of calling and his passion in life, would just simply discard these plates, even though they're on their way to commit a triple murder. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and it is picked up, upon here by the barrister in his notes. The barrister then goes on to speak further about this getaway vehicle, where he writes, "Police scientists can find no evidence to place this VW Passat at the scene of the crime, not even an oil spillage. Police scientists confirm gun residue is present on the rear seat of this Passat, although it is inconsistent with spent cartridge residue found at the scene of the crime." So we have heard countless times regarding the VW Passat and what a poor state it was in. There was no verifiable tyre tracks found at the crime scene, the entrance to the lane. There was no oil dropped from the vehicle at the entrance to the lane or where Darren Nichols supposedly parked up to wait for Michael Steele and Jack Womes to come back. What is interesting is that gunpowder residue is found in the rear of the Passat, but it was not consistent with the spent cartridges found at the scene of the crime. The barrister then goes on to talk about Darren Nichols in some more detail and regarding the vehicles that Darren Nichols owned. He does mention that one of the most striking and obvious factors is whenever a motor vehicle is used for an illegal purpose, Nichols supplies the vehicle. It is owned and hired by Nichols. The VW Scirocco, owned and used for alleged drug run into Holland. The VW Cabaret, owned and used to take drug money into Holland. The Peugeot 406, owned and used for alleged drug run into Holland. The Jaguar XJ6, owned and used to retrieve drugs on the 13th of the 5th, 96. Transit van, owned and used to retrieve drugs on the 13th of the 5th, 96. Land Rover, owned and used to recover drugs on the 13th of the 5th, 96. Citroen, used to recover drugs at Galloway's Corner. Seat, hired and used for alleged drug run to Holland. Ford Mondeo, hired and used for alleged drug run to Holland. And VW Passat, owned and alleged murder vehicle. Now, all of these vehicles were owned or hired by Darren Nichols, and they were used for those purposes that I've just mentioned. There is also a massive argument regarding the VW Passat, the getaway vehicle for these murders, and who actually owned the vehicle at the time these people were killed. Darren Nichols states that he sold it some months before or some weeks before the murders, whereas Michael Steele claims that he never bought this vehicle. Darren Nichols didn't get any paperwork filled out for whoever bought the vehicle, so there is no way to say for sure who the actual owner of this vehicle was when these people were killed. Darren Nichols didn't send any paperwork off to the DVLA to get the owner changed over or anything like that. And he has no documentation to say that this vehicle was actually ever sold. So did Darren Nichols actually own this vehicle that he said he was driving on the night of those murders? It's an interesting point to think about. The barrister then goes on to talk about the phone call from Sarah Saunders as Pat Tate was entering the lane itself. He then mentions the following, which is actually quite interesting. Pre-influence statements by Nichols clearly suggest Saunders' phone call commences as the Range Rover is turning into the lane. The time of the call commencement is 18:44 hours, giving the Range Rover 1 minute to reach the gate after turning into the lane. This means that Tate has at least 2 minutes and 46 seconds of phone call left, which does not fit into the alleged schedule. It also means that Womes and Nichols must arrive at least by 1841, hopefully to be in position, as Womes would have to walk from the turnoff into the lane to the area where the gate is situated. Nichols alleges to leave the halfway house at 18:30 hours to travel to Workhouse Lane, which is a 14-mile drive. Allowing for an average speed of 45 miles per hour, it will take Nichols and Womes 19 minutes to reach the top of the lane. When the police retraced this journey, it took them 21 minutes. This would indicate an ETA to the top of the lane of 18:48 hours. Nichols and Womes arrived too late, 8 minutes too late. If we adapt Nichols' influenced attempt, which is the phone call which ends as they reach the top of the lane, this indicates the Range Rover arrives at exactly 18:48 hours at the top of the lane. Clearly, Womes and Nichols have to arrive at least 3 minutes prior to this at a minimum, which means they must arrive at 18:45 hours at the latest. Calculated ETA is 18:49 hours. They are still 4 minutes too late. The barrister then goes on to state, could Nichols be telling an essence of truth? Let's assume he is in the Range Rover and witnesses Saunders' call, which does not end or commence as the Range Rover enters the lane, 18:44 hours to 18:48 hours. Observe closely police photographs at the scene. There are carbon deposits under the exhaust tailpipe of the Range Rover, which would indicate it stood there running for some time. We also have a confidential witness statement from Raymond Alfred Wright on the 13th of the 12th 95, who observes a Range Rover enter the lane between 1850 and 1900 hours, which he claims had rear lamp guards. The deceased vehicle of course does not. We also have the witness Kevin Tarbuck, unused witness statement from the 14th of the 12th 95, who at 1940 hours witnesses a white Ford Escort van pull out of the lane in front of him. This witness describes Nichols' account of a near miss, but Nichols puts the VW Passat in the frame, not an Escort van. Police at one stage had Tarbuck as a confidential witness. Raymond Wright's statement 13th for the 12th 95 confidential witness, the Range Rover this man observes entering Workhouse Lane at 18:50 hours on the 6th of the 12th is clearly not the deceased vehicle, as rear lamp guards are a feature of the vehicle he witnesses. What is significant is that 3 men of large stature occupy the vehicle. The one sitting in the rear offside seat is wearing a fawn light coloured top, not overalls. Certainly some interesting information there, particularly those witness statements. I may have to go back over those again at some point and take a closer look at those, which I'll make a video about in the future. Now, also interesting to note the carbon deposits under the exhaust. This was actually mentioned in the summing up in court as well, that they believed that the vehicle was left there running for some time. What did the vehicle enter the lane and then literally wait there for a little while before they were killed? That's an interesting point to make. But certainly those witness statements regarding the Range Rover or a different Range Rover being seen and also an Escort van pulling out of the turning, they are certainly ones that I should make videos about, especially trying to tie it in with Darren Nichols' version of events when pulling out in front of a vehicle, etc. I think that could make for quite an interesting video series, so I'll definitely do that in the future. And the last point I want to make in this video is something that I did touch upon at the very start of this video, in fact, and that is regarding DC Jim's relationship with Darren Nichols. Now, what we know from the transcripts, from the recorded telephone calls and from the police investigation against their own officer, DC Jim, is the fact that the relationship with Darren Nichols actually starts at the very latest, January 1996, and this relationship, I believe, could have been going on for a lot longer than that. Now, what I want you to ask yourself is that obviously Darren Nichols comes to the attention of the police in January, and 5 months actually elapse between the time that Darren Nichols comes onto the radar and his actual arrest. Now, why is that? Why did the police sit on this information regarding Darren Nichols being at the crime scene, being tied in with DC Jim, and also being tied in, most importantly, with Michael Steele and Jack Womes, who were placed near the crime scene on the evening of the triple murder? Why did the police know of Darren Nichols, yet sit on this information for 5 months? For all the police knew, Darren Nichols could have been the murderer. Darren Nichols could have been a dangerous person who they allowed to roam free for 5 months. Now, during all of the police investigation, we are led to believe that Michael Steele's name came up within the first 2 or 3 days of the murders taking place. Yet it was quite easy to tie in Darren Nichols alongside Michael Steele. Yet you don't hear of Darren Nichols' name ever being mentioned. Is that because DC Jim's relationship with Darren Nichols was known by other officers, by people actually leading this investigation? Why was Darren Nichols never mentioned as a very much a prime suspect early on in this investigation? It's only really the name of Michael Steele that you hear about. You hear of Ivan Dibley talking about how this crime was committed, how there must have been a 4th occupant in the Range Rover that night, how there must have been a second person who was waiting down the lane with the guns to pass to someone who gets out of the Range Rover, and then the shooting can commence. But if Darren Nichols was making all of these phone calls on December the 6th, if Darren Nichols could be tied to the crime scene around the time of these murders, and if Darren Nichols could also be tied in with this police officer who was known to be corrupt, who was actually being investigated by his own police force, why does Darren Nichols' name never get mentioned? Why is Darren Nichols not under severe surveillance or even arrested until 5 months after these murders? I'm going to ask you some questions about your character. Do you follow? Yes, I do. Mr. Nichols, in 1995 and 1996, did you know the meaning of the word dishonest? Yes. Did you think that dishonesty was linked to being funny? I don't know. Because this morning we heard the tape and it is at pages 82 and 83. Do you remember that there was a tape that you were being asked questions about your relationship with DC Jim? A question was asked which we heard, which was this. Do you think DC Jim was being dishonest in what he was doing? Dishonest in relation to the £400 that was being offered as a result of 2 false names being supplied? And at first you said, not really. What did you mean by that? Well, I felt that because I had given the information they wanted to know, you know, more like who it was and that, he decided to protect me. You did not think it was dishonest to provide information which was false? I didn't really think about it. You did not think about it, okay. You did not think about naming 2 men as being responsible for the drugs in the pit as being dishonest, is that correct? Well, yeah, I just figured it was a good excuse, so it wasn't looked at, you know, as if I did it. Did you not think about the consequences to those men? No. Did you think in 1995, Mr. Nichols, about anyone other than yourself? Yes. Who? Well, my wife and children. Okay, well, we will come to that at pages 83, which you were asked about later on, and we heard the tape where you said, I mean, you can tell me it's dishonest, but like, as far as I'm concerned, I told him, he gave me the money, and I was laughing because I thought it was a joke. That is what I meant, Mr. Nichols, about when I asked you whether being linked to being dishonest was also being linked to being funny. So did you? Well, no, I thought it was funny that I was getting paid for information about myself. And finally, on this point, you said this. I'm sure it was dishonest, but it was still funny. The fact that I was being paid to tell someone where I'd put it. You still thought it was funny? Yes, I did. Okay, Mr. Nichols. And the tape that was being played in which you gave that graphic phrase, I will just repeat that for you. You said you would dish them out like sweets. Can you assist this jury, as they cannot see your face at this time? You have just smiled at me. Is that correct, Mr. Nichols? I was smiling when I listened to myself speak. Did you find it funny? I was just listening to myself speak. It made me laugh. It made me smile about listening to myself. You, Mr. Nichols, would agree until your arrest were a thoroughly dishonest criminal, were you not? Well, broke the law, yeah. Dishonestly. I think that is breaking the law, isn't it? We have heard you have a conviction for counterfeiting. That was the production of what denomination of forged notes, Mr. Nichols? I got a conviction for, distributing counterfeit money, yeah, and it was £10 notes. Distributing it to whom? People that wanted to buy it. You were selling forged notes, is that right? In block to others who would then go round to shops and pass them and launder them on. In a nutshell, is that it? Yeah, well, I sold counterfeit money. Okay, Mr. Nichols, what I'm trying to say is that you sold them to the first punter, who would then go to some corner shop, give a £10 note, and that would not be paid into the bank because it was a forgery. That was the end gain, was it not? That's the end result of counterfeit money, yes. And you knew that that would happen? Yeah, I must have. You have handled the old offence of receiving stolen coupons, have you not? Yes, I have. These are cigarette coupons, are they? Yes. Those cigarette coupons, as I think, had been taken from a factory, is that correct? I believe so, yeah. And the result of handling them and selling them to other people was that those other people could then obtain the goods that were provided if they presented enough coupons. Yeah, that's right. Did you give any of those coupons to DC Jim? No, I never. Did he have any access to them? I believe he did have some, yeah. Via whom? I think it was, well, I presume it was my governor, the bloke I work for. Trunley? Yeah. And did Mr. Trunley have in his possession stolen coupons? He bought some coupons off me. Is the answer to my question yes? Yes, he bought some coupons off of me. Which year are we talking about regarding this going on? Well, before my arrest, so 95, 96? When he bought cigarette coupons from you, he knew, did he not, Mr. Trunley, that you had no lawful right to have how many thousand in your possession? About 100 to 150,000. Now, no one could smoke enough cigarettes to have £150,000 worth of coupons in their possession, could they, Mr. Nichols? No. So Mr. Trunley was knowingly receiving those stolen coupons. Yeah, he bought some coupons off me, yeah. Would you mind answering the question? It is yes, he was knowingly receiving stolen coupons, was he not? I presume it was knowingly, yeah. Did he ask you, Mr. Nichols, how you came to be in possession of that many thousand coupons? Well, he didn't buy all of them. I mean, he had, I think, about 10,000. I don't recall if he asked. Did Mr. Trunley ask you how you were in possession to sell him that many thousand coupons? No, I don't think so. Was it obvious that they were stolen? I would have said so, yeah. In 1995, Mr. Nichols, you were a drug pusher, were you not? Well, drug dealer, yeah. Why do you make the distinction between pushing drugs and dealing them? Well, it's probably the same thing, but I just use the term drug dealing. Do you think that it's more polite? Well, drug pushing then. Pushing drugs in Braintree and elsewhere. Yeah, I sold drugs in Braintree, yeah. And elsewhere? And elsewhere, yeah. Elsewhere in Essex? Yeah. All of Essex? No, just specific people. Specific people all around the county of Essex. Yes, some people didn't live in Essex. Where and how far did your tentacles reach? Oh, very close, but it was Suffolk. And would this be the position as a drug dealer, to use your words, you would be supplying to a smaller supplier down the line? Yes, I suppose so. So you were not dealing on the streets, Mr. Nichols, were you? I did sell some drugs in small quantities to people that were going to smoke them. Like I did, some deals, with some drugs, and that was directly to people, yeah. But apart from giving drugs directly to people, you had your contacts who were the dealers down the line. And they were down the line from you, who might sell on to other dealers on the street. Is that the position in the chain? Yes. Did you have contacts in London? I know people in London. No drug dealers in London? Not particularly, no. Okay, Mr. Nichols, do you know any drug dealers in Kent? No, I don't think I know anyone that lives in Kent. You had on your own admission access to shotguns, is that right? I did supply a shotgun, yeah. But you moved in a world where you could put the word about that you wanted a shotgun. Yes. You do not have a license, do you, for a shotgun yourself? No, I don't. You had contact with men who were in a position to supply serious firearms, did you not, Mr. Nichols? As I said, I could ask people about getting shotguns, yeah. When you say people, what sort of people are we talking about? People I know. I suppose criminals. As we have heard, informing on dealers and getting paid yourself and then giving information about them, that's the way that you've been operating, Mr. Nichols, is that right? Well, that was the idea, yeah. And that happened, did it not? Not particularly, no. Are you saying that you never sold drugs to a single dealer? And did not ever tell Detective Constable Jim the name of the dealer to whom you had sold the drugs? I'd supplied some drugs and told him who to, yeah. Mr. Nichols, can we have it straight? You knew, did you not, that we have it heard this morning, actually, that the police officer was utterly corrupt. DC Jim was utterly corrupt. When I first knew him, no. I didn't know he was utterly corrupt. When you last knew him, well, I know he's corrupt now. You knew he was utterly corrupt, did you not? When he was asking for £50 in respect of a reward that had been given to you for your information. You must have known that he was corrupt, did you not? No, I didn't think he was utterly corrupt then. You just thought he was a little corrupt. No, I just thought he was a strange person. Do you seriously wish to tell this jury, and look at them please do turn to look at them, that you did not realise that a serving police officer should not ask for £50 as a drink for a reward on the information that you had provided? I didn't know how the police work. I mean, if anyone else done me a favour, then I would give them money. You are saying then that you seriously believed that when that officer asked for £50 as a reward that you had received, that could be an honest request? No, I don't see it as honest. What do you see it as then, Mr. Nichols? Well, thinking about it now, obviously I think it's dishonest. Now? Well, I never really thought about it at the time. I didn't give it much thought. You did not? That is why I asked you. Do you see, Mr. Nichols, whether in 1995 or 1996 you knew the meaning of the word dishonest? Did you think about that ever? What was honest and what was dishonest? Did you think about the difference? Not particularly. The word truth and untruth, or the word truth and the word lie, was that something that you ever thought about? When? In 1995 and 1996? Not particularly. No. The word that you use, which bridges the two, is set up, is it not? In what respect, sorry? To have someone set up in your state of mind in 1995 and 1996 was to get them arrested for whatever, true or false. Well, the word set up in my mind is given information, and if they get nicked on it, they've been set up, haven't they? But that information did not have to be true, did it, Mr. Nichols? Yeah, I think it did. Did it? Because you were not giving information about those two men. We can go round it and round it again, Mr. Nichols. Who were going to be set up for those drugs? Do you remember those two innocent gentlemen who you framed for those drugs? That was untrue information, which incidentally you got £400 for. Correct or incorrect? Well, I told the story about them, yeah. So they were being set up, were they not, Mr. Nichols? Well, I don't see it as they were being set up. To provide information to a police officer who you know was saying to you, we need some names, right? Yes. Because other officers higher up are saying, I have got to produce some names for all these drugs that have been found in the pit, right? Yeah. You were providing those names, right, Mr. Nichols? Yes. Those names were being set up, were they not, Mr. Nichols? No. Did you think, or did it occur to you, that they might be arrested? No. Okay, Mr. Nichols, so say for instance that those names were needed from above. They would have been supplied to those officers above, would they not? That was the idea, yeah. And if supplied to those officers above, connected with the drug squad or officers who were in a position to investigate drugs, if you named two men and you provided those names, they may be interviewed, might they not? I presume so, yes. So it is not inconceivable that they might be arrested, right? I suppose. So what do you mean you suppose so? It is not conceivable, is it? Okay, it's not conceivable. Did you think that when you gave those names, did you even consider that to be a possibility, that two men that you had falsely accused of dumping drugs, that they would actually be interviewed and arrested? No, I never. Because you just thought about yourself, did you not, Mr. Nichols? I thought about them not finding out it was me, yeah. Did you have a drinking problem in 1995 and 1996? I did drink a lot, yeah. That is not an answer to my question, Mr. Nichols. It is much quicker if you would listen accurately to my question. Did you have a drink problem in 1995-96? I drank too much. I suppose I had a bit of a problem, yeah. You drank, by the way, at the Cock at Raynham with that corrupt police officer, did you not? I had a drink with him there, yeah. You realise that in this court, Mr. Nichols, you should speak the truth. Yes. In that case, Mr. Nichols, I would like to understand if you can help us. What you had been told by the police or anyone else as to how you should present your evidence. The reason I ask you this is because Mr. Parkins on my left asked you a question on Wednesday afternoon, which was this. The question in the form of a possible suggestion, namely, you have been told to keep it vague, and your reply was this. No, I was told to answer the question. Who, Mr. Nichols, told you to answer the question? Questions it was. Questions? Who told you? Before I came in, I was told to answer the question specifically. My question was who? It was Detective Superintendent Story, I think. Story, he was sitting in the back of the court, was he not? I don't remember seeing him. Where did Story tell you to answer the questions? When did this conversation take place, Mr. Nichols? Before I came here to start giving evidence. I was sitting out in the corridor behind that wall there. He came out and told me, only answer the questions specifically asked of you and don't go any further. Because there's things I shouldn't say. So he told me just to answer specific questions. Fair enough. Were you, Mr. Nichols, told that the Passat had been found? The Passat as in the getaway vehicle? Yes. And I think you told us that it had been found post-committal, after the committal. I think that is the evidence. If I am wrong, I will be corrected. Did you say that? I think I said I found out that it had been found after the committal, yes. And how did you find out? Well, like I said before, probably a policeman told me. Which policeman told you? I don't know. I mean, I'm only in contact with a few policemen. Which few policemen could it have happened to have told you this information that the Passat had been found, Mr. Nichols? The only policemen that I really had contact with that used to visit me were DC Brown and DC Winston. They were the main two. Okay, Mr. Nichols, so DC Brown and Winston were the interviewing officers, and we have seen them in interviews. One of the two at some time visited you and have just volunteered this information. Whichever he was or whoever it was, they told you about the Passat and that it had been found. Is that correct? I don't recall, but I do recall that someone told me it had been found, yeah. Do you remember one of those officers coming to see you and telling you that? Well, all I know is that it had been found, so I'd have to say I presume so, yeah. Who told you, more importantly, that the case depended upon your evidence, that you were the main witness? Who told you that? My solicitor, the police, I suppose most people. The police? I think most people told me I'm the main witness. In what circumstances did the police tell you that this case depends upon you, Mr. Nichols? Again, I can't recall when it was said to me, but it has been said that I am the main witness in the case. By the police? Yeah, by my solicitor, like I said as well. I am concentrating on the police, Mr. Nichols. Okay. Did they say that you are the main witness, and did they mention this to you in one of their visits? I presume so, because I know they said to me I'm the main witness. Because as we shall see, you have been frequently visited by the police, have you not? Yes, I have. You have been visited from the day of your arrest. I am sorry, you were visited from the day of your arrest on an almost daily basis by the police, were you not, Mr. Nichols? At different times, while I was bailed to reside where the police said I was, they visited me daily, yeah. Whilst you were being interviewed, as we see in our bundles here, by Winston and Brown, whilst you were being interviewed, whilst you were being questioned at the same time, Winston and Brown were dropping in to see you in your cell, were they not? Yes, they did come and see me. You were given, on occasion, and we will come to it, a filing cabinet, were you not, Mr. Nichols? Yes. What did you put into it? My clothing. Into a filing cabinet? It's the best that they could do. Mr. Nichols, why are you giving evidence? There's several reasons. You are not giving evidence, are you, because you want these men convicted? Well, that's the main reason, yeah. It is. If that is right, then why did you not give evidence before you were arrested to the police? It wasn't until the day before I was arrested that I finished my decision, or finalised my decision. Okay, Mr. Nichols, now, you have told the court that you did not want to, and we have heard the tape today, give evidence against these men because you knew that these men would know that you were the person who had given evidence. Is that right? In the murder, that's correct, yeah. So it is nonsense to suggest that you are giving evidence out of some honest wish that you want these men convicted of murder. No, like I say, I changed my mind the day before I was arrested. You changed your mind, Mr. Nichols, when you were arrested for murder, did you not? No, I never. It was the day before I was arrested. Can I just say what the event was? Is that okay? Just wait a minute, Mr. Nichols. If you had in your mind any wish for these men to be arrested for murder between the 6th of December and the 13th of May, you could have provided intelligence to the police, could you not? Yeah. Okay, Mr. Nichols, so how about anonymous intelligence? Well, I felt it could only come from me because I was there with them. Do you understand the word anonymous? Well, you know, most things could only come from me because I was there with them. Do you understand the word anonymous, Mr. Nichols? Yes, but how can it be anonymous when I'm the only one who knows it? You could have provided anonymous intelligence, Mr. Nichols. I know what you mean by anonymous, but like I say, how can I say something when no one else knew but me? Instead of providing anonymous intelligence from the 6th of December until the 13th of May, what you did was actually send a Christmas card to Mr. Steele, did you not? As I said, I'm sure he got a Christmas card, yeah. Do you remember in your first interview after being arrested? I do recall it, but I don't remember it. You were arrested for murder on the 13th, on the day of your arrest, were you not? I'll take your word for it, but yeah, I think I was. And you were then interviewed with a solicitor, and with that solicitor you said nothing. You made a no-comment interview. Those interviews 1 and 2, which the jury do not have, because you said nothing. Is that correct? That's right, yeah. And in the course of that interview, the first interview, you were arrested for murder. I believe it was in one of those interviews, yeah. And there you were, according to what you just told my lord and this jury, determined to tell the police on the day before your arrest who was responsible for murder. Is that correct? No, that's not what I said. You told us, Mr. Nichols, that you had changed your mind the day before you were arrested. That is what you just told my lord and the jury. Yeah, that's right. So when you were arrested, you had changed your mind. Like I said, yes. So when you were arrested on the 13th in particular, during the first interview when you were formally arrested for this murder or these murders, did you say, I would like to tell you that Mr. Steele and Mr. Womes are guilty of these murders, but not me? No, I never. Why not? Well, I was still thinking that at the time I'd been set up by the police and I was waiting to find out what occurred. Yet you tell us, Mr. Nichols, that you came to this decision the day before you were arrested. That's correct, yeah. And that was a final decision, was it? Well, it was something that once I was arrested, that, I knew that I'd have to talk about the murder. You did not talk about the murder, Mr. Nichols, until you had agreed to give information, didn't you? No. Was a deal done, Mr. Nichols? They told me I'd be a protected witness. Was the deal, Mr. Nichols, we will not charge you with the murder if you give evidence? No. Would you agree with this? That when you were arrested for murder, you, Mr. Nichols, became very, very scared. I can't recall because I was still waiting, thinking the police were going to rescue me from the situation. What made you scared was the fact that it became obvious to you that DC Jim had also been arrested. Well, I figured that as he hadn't come along and he must be been arrested, yeah. So you were losing your protector, were you not? I became scared because I knew I couldn't be remanded with those people. You were scared, were you not? We will find it in the papers. You were scared because you realised that the corrupt officer could not get you off the hook because he himself was arrested. True or false? Well, I never knew he was arrested until I finally asked. When you finally asked, Mr. Nichols, and it was admitted to you by the police that DC Jim was in fact under arrest, you were scared. Yes, because before that, I thought he'd set me up. Then afterwards, I realised that he hadn't set me up. He was arrested as well. And you were scared, Mr. Nichols. Like I said, I was scared, yes. You said you became scared because, quote, I didn't want to be remanded with those people. Who did you mean by those people? Mick and Jack. Were you remanded with those people? No. Would you just look, please, at interview 3, exhibit 127. You have it in front of you, do you? Interview 3, which begins on the 14th of May at 9 o'clock at night. Yes, I do, yeah. And the first thing that we notice is that you are at page 2 being interviewed without a solicitor. Do you notice that? Yeah, I do. Now, why are you being interviewed without a solicitor, Mr. Nichols? I thought because I was a protected witness, I wouldn't need one, that the police would be looking after me. The police would be looking after you? Yeah. You would not need a solicitor because you were being protected? Yes, I figured that I didn't need one. Okay, and at that page, I see that you are being interviewed on the face of it for the offence of possession of controlled drugs with the intent to supply. In fact, Mr. Nichols, were you ever asked questions in this interview about possessing drugs with intent, with the intention to supplying them? I don't know. You don't know. But please look at page 5. Do you see point 5.28? Yes. The phrase, quote, these tapes are not for the general, quote. Do you see that phrase? Yes, I do. Yeah, it's in front of me, yeah. Now, Mr. Nichols, DC Brown states to you, quote, No, these tapes will not be produced at court without obviously consultation with our senior officers and obviously a representative of the Crown Prosecution. You then state, quote, they are not the general ones that everyone gets a copy of? DC Brown replies, no, they are certainly not. So at the moment, do you agree that that was a fair recollection of the conversation we had? The conversation we had was a conversation that had taken place with a notebook and not a tape, which we see in reference, do we not, from page 3 onwards? Yes. And we can see that you had spoken to Mr. Barrington, is that right? Yes. Having asked to see him, is that right? Yeah, I asked to see a senior type police person. Okay, and you asked Mr. Barrington if you gave the name of the officer who believed was arrested, would he confirm it, is that right? Yes. And that is what happened, is that correct? Yes. So you knew before this interview, because this had taken place before the interview at 2100 hours, you knew that DC Jim had been arrested? Yes. And it is therefore obvious, just looking at this, page 4, that before this interview, discussions had taken place as to your protection, because we see it on page 4, do we not? Protection had been given to you and your family. Yes. And it was being pointed out to you before this interview that you had to be totally honest in all the details given so that an accurate judgment could be made regarding the level of protection. Is that right? Yes. You asked about protection in prison. You were told about the system of protection that was available for registered informants, yes? Yes. And so before you went into this interview, you already had decided, had you, Mr. Nichols, that you were going to provide information to these officers? Yes. Information which you believed was going to become part of the public domain. The public were not going to see this because these interviews, as you were then assured, were they, going to be produced at court unless some senior officer or representative of the Crown Prosecution advised otherwise, correct? Yes. So when this interview 3 is taking place, it is taking place on the basis of you providing information, is it not? Yes. You are not, are you, Mr. Nichols, in this interview being interrogated as a suspect suspected of possessing drugs with the intent to supply, are you? No. What has happened, because it has already been, may I use your phrase, Mr. Nichols, set up, what has happened right from interview 3 is that you are providing information. Yes. Information which the police wish to receive. Yes. And by the end of interview 3, Mr. Nichols, you believing that the tapes would not be used at court, you and the police were they not engaged in some sort of situation with you, with them pointing you in the right direction? Okay, Mr. Nichols, now, if we look at page 6, we get the feel, do we not? Because there is a DC Winston saying in the middle of the page here, quote, you are obviously going to tell us things perhaps you don't know. And I think that what you do say is going to provoke us to ask you questions. And later on, after you replied yes, Winston goes on to state, quote, we've got a lot of information regarding the drug deals and also the shooting of Patrick Tate, Craig Rolfe and Tony Tucker. So now it is over to you. Start where you want to start. If we feel you need to be pointed in a right direction, then we will remind you of which direction we want you to go in, okay? And you reply, yeah. Yeah, that's true, yeah. So a relationship, a good relationship, would you agree, had already been built up during the interview 3 between the police officers and yourself to provide them with information? Well, I don't recall how I felt at the time about them. Well, you were not, were you, during this interview 3 having, is that right, signed the police officer's notebook that dealt with you wishing to provide information in an interview that was not tape recorded? You were not uncomfortable with these police officers, were you? Well, no, I don't think I was. Okay then, Mr. Nichols, if you look at the top of page 6, you had just signed Brown's notebook, had you not? Yeah. And Winston had said, quote, now as we go through, Darren, you are on Christian name terms, are you not? Yes. So just let us remind ourselves, Mr. Nichols, you were you not, still arrested for murder when this interview was taking place? Here the officer is saying to you, quote, "Now as we go through, Darren, you will appreciate that we are going to have to take some notes so we can jog our memory, because Mr. Barrington is going to have to ask us what is being said." This is what was happening with a man you were arrested for murder. That's correct, isn't it, Mr. Nichols? Well, I don't know if I was still arrested for murder, but I'll take your word for it because I'm pretty sure I was. This interview 3, you have just agreed with me, is an interview in which you were working together in the right direction, pointed almost in the right direction if necessary, to provide information. Yes. And we can see, can we not, if you look at page 8, how the police were making sure that they got down, or it was recorded, the information that they wanted, because it was they who were wanting the information, was it not? Yes. Okay, Mr. Nichols, now, if we take a look at page 8, for example, paragraph 10.20, it is a conversation about a bungalow, and DC Brown says to you, quote, "Who was there at the time?" And you say, quote, "Just me, Mick and Pat Tate." DC Brown replies, quote, "Mick, you mean Mickey Steele?" You then reply, quote, "Mickey Steele, yeah." DC Brown then replies, "Yes." The police were making sure that they got you to say the names in firm black capitals as they were to appear on this piece of paper, namely Mickey Steele, is that right? Yeah. Then at page 9 at the bottom is the passage where you are going through the history of Tate, as you describe it, and Mick. 5 lines up from the bottom, quote, "I see Mick doing some work round at Pat's house, as they were friendly, and that started from there really. He asked me if I knew anyone who wanted to buy any drugs, and I said, quote, 'Oh,' and immediately DC Brown comes in, quote, 'Mickey did,' and you said Mickey Steele did, yeah. Is that correct, Mr. Nichols?" Yes. Do you agree then, Mr. Nichols, that they were very politely prompting you along, making sure the names like Mickey Steele were actually put down on the page as such? Yes. And what happened in interview 3 continued on, did it not, Mr. Nichols? There was no change in their relationship with you, Mr. Nichols, was there? Do you mean into another interview, or? Yes, as in interview 4. When that began, interview 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10, the police and you were engaged, were you not, on the process of getting your information down in a simple, understandable, logical form? That was what was going on, was it not, Mr. Nichols? Yes. You, the informant, were providing the information. Yeah. But the information that you provided was not all true, Mr. Nichols. Well, in number 3, no, it wasn't, no. I'm sorry? No. He said in number 3, no. In spite of the fact that you had discussions about protection, which included the protection of your wife and family, is that correct? Those discussions did take place? Yes. In spite of the fact that, as we see, the police are pointing out to you the importance of telling the truth in interview 3, look at page 4 again, Mr. Nichols. It has been said to you that Barrington had already said it was being repeated, that you must be totally honest in all details given so that an accurate judgment could be made regarding the level of protection offered to you. By page 11, you are lying, are you not? Just look at page 11. This is dealing with the first visit to Amsterdam. The visit you say was with Mr. Steele in the Gulf. Quote, "He went to visit Stone's Calf. I didn't really get in on the conversation. I'd never been to Amsterdam. He said to me, quote, 'Be back here in an hour.' And I went for a good wander around and had a little look. The red light district and all that. And then came back and he said he wanted me to meet this man. I met this man, John Stone, who owns Stone's Calf, and then we all went back to eat. Quote, now that was a complete lie, was it not?" Well, I did meet John Stone, but basically, yeah, I tried to make myself sound uninvolved. It is a lie that you went for a wander around, is it not, Mr. Nichols? Yes. So within minutes, and it is within minutes if we played a tape, but I'm not going to, having been told that you should be completely honest if the level of protection to you and your family is going to be correct, you were then lying. Like I said, I thought no one else is going to talk about me, so what I don't say, I will be charged less. No one was going to talk about you. Were you under the impression, arrested for drugs and still arrested for murder, that no one was going to be talking about you? Well, I was under the impression that the others weren't going to confess to smuggling just to prove me wrong. That I only smuggled once, to admit smuggling more than once. Your mind, Mr. Nichols, although in this scared situation, was still sufficiently dishonest for you to lie. That is the truth, is it not? Like I said, the truth is that I thought what I don't tell them, they won't know. So yes, I did lie. Let us just understand it. Perhaps we could end this way. If the court thinks it right, it is not a question of leaving things out, Mr. Nichols. It is a question of deliberately lying. Yeah, I deliberately left things out, so I was lying, yes. So no, you did not leave things out by omission. You lied, did you not? Yes, I did. You lied again in this interview, did you not? I've already said that the whole interview I was saying things to make me sound less involved. Okay, Miss Nichols, now, on Friday afternoon the point was being made by you that you agreed that you originally had not told the truth. You lied about the fact of actually being present when Mr. Steele met Mr. Stone on the first occasion that you went in the Golf convertible to Amsterdam. Do you remember that we went through that? Yeah. It was not, was it, until interview 13, which is on the 12th of June, nearly a month later, that you first told the police the version which you tell us now. Is that correct? Yep. And that was a month later, and you say, do you, that the version that you told the police a month later and to this jury is the truth? Yes. Is that correct? Yes. That is correct, is it? So could I just make sure that I understand what you say the truth is? You told us, and I will go into this in a little detail later, but in short, that the topic of smuggling drugs had been mentioned as a result that you ended up going with Mr. Steele to Holland in your Golf convertible. Is that correct? That is it in a nutshell, is it not? Yes. And the purpose was, as you realised because the topic had been mentioned before, the purpose was to go and buy drugs at Stone's Cafe. Yes. And off you went in the convertible. You got to Amsterdam, and did Mr. Steele find it easy to find the cafe, or did that take some time, or what? I mean, I don't recall, but we did find it. You found it, okay, and having found it, you and Mr. Steele met Mr. Stone for the first time, is that correct? Like I said, I thought it was the first time, yes. There is no suggestion that they had any conversation on the phone or anything like that, was there? Not that I'm aware of, no. And you were there, were you not? Yes, I was. So it was not a question of, well, I rang last night and now I'm here. We haven't met before, and etc, etc, etc. It appeared to you that they had never met before and never even spoken to each other before. Is that correct? It appeared to me that they'd never met each other, yeah. Okay, Miss Nichols, so there you are at Stone's Cafe, and Mr. Stone, what, is introduced by Mr. Steele? Your name is given, is it? This is Darren Nichols? I don't recall, really. He turned up and we basically introduced ourselves to each other, yeah. And there was a discussion about drugs, was there? Yes, there was. Was there £80,000 in someone's bag? Is it £80,000 or £60,000? I can't be certain of the amount, but it was a large amount of money. Either 60 or 80 or something in that region, is that right? Yes. And you told us that you remembered it being counted in front of you by Mr. Steele on the ferry, is that correct? No, I don't remember saying that. Okay, Miss Nichols, do you remember anything happening with this bag? And anything being counted in front of you by Mr. Steele on the ferry? No, I remember, like, seeing the money because he opened it to take some money out, as I said, but it was only a small amount of money. Either £60,000 or £80,000. No, like I say, on the ferry he needed some money, and he opened up the bag and physically took a small amount out. That's when I saw that the bag was full of money. So there you were with 60 or 80,000 pounds sterling, and Mr. Steele wanted to then take that money to buy some cannabis. Is that correct? Yes. Whether it be resin or whether it be herbal cannabis, I'm not sure that it mattered, to be honest. Not sure if it mattered, okay? And Mr. Stone said words to this effect, quote, "Well, I haven't got any. You never know when it will come. It may turn up tomorrow." Is that correct? Yes. Mr. Nichols, if there had been cannabis in Mr. Stone's caff or nearby, how was that cannabis going to get to England? The same way it always came. It would have been bought by boat. You say that, but Mr. Steele was with you in a Golf convertible, was he not? Yes, he was. So how was the boat with the skipper in a convertible going to get from England to wherever? If there had been drugs, Mr. Steele was going to go home and leave. You know, just leave us there. I see. And was this discussed? And when was this discussed? I don't recall. Probably at some point. Probably when we were there or en route. You see, have you ever said in any of the 14 interviews, your statements that you have made, that Mr. Steele said, quote, "If there is cannabis, Darren, I'll go back to England and get the boat"? No, because it never happened. No, I am talking about the plan, Mr. Nichols. No, it's never crossed my mind because there wasn't any drugs. There wasn't any drugs to purchase anyway. But £80,000 buys roughly how many kilos of cannabis, Mr. Nichols? Well, I suppose roughly 70. 70 kilos? Yes. Okay, Miss Nichols, now, 70 kilos of cannabis, where was that going to be put in a Golf convertible? Well, it would have gone in the boot. Did Mr. Steele say to you, quote, "And by the way, Darren, I'd make sure the boot of your convertible is cleaned because I may be putting 60 or 70 kilos of cannabis in it"? Is that what the sense that he gave you? Not particularly, not that I can recall, no. You can help us because you know about cars, Mr. Nichols. How big is the boot in a Golf convertible? Not that big. It is small, is it not? Yeah. It is particularly small because the roof of a convertible has to go down and lie flat on the back of the car, and in order to do that the boot is smaller, is it not, Mr. Nichols? Well, the boot isn't any lower because of the seats of the Golf convertible still go down like any normal Golf to allow you to go through. So it's physically no lower. It's just a square back rather than a hatch. It's got a little square bit on it. What did you have in the boot of your convertible, Mr. Nichols? Just travelling bags. And the weight of, did you say 60 kilos of cannabis in the boot of a convertible, 70 kilos? What effect would that have on the boot? What was it, a B registration Golf? No, I think it was a Y registration Golf. Y registration, so that is a 1983 model, is it not? Approximately, yeah. And if there had been cannabis, you would have been driving through Holland with all that in the boot of a Golf convertible? Yeah, 70 kilos isn't a lot for the boot of a car. Depending what else was in the boot. Well, yeah, there would only have been 2 people in the car. Were there discussions, I mean, if there is some drugs, we'll go back to England, how, and, you know, how would the boat then return? Sorry? Well, you go there and you tell us that Mr. Steele intended with all this money to buy drugs. Yes. You tell us now, I think for the first time actually, that he was going to go back and get the boat. You are not going to actually drive back with this cannabis, is that right? Yes. Now, Miss Nichols, you are not just sort of saying yes because it sort of fits the story that has to be told. Because I am asking these sort of questions for the first time. No, nothing was asked before because there was no drugs, so nothing ever cropped up. There must have been a plan as you set sail to Holland as to what was going to happen when the drugs were going to be bought. Because it was anticipated they were going to be bought, was it not, Mr. Nichols? Yes, it was. So what was the plan? As far as I'm aware, Mick was going to go home and get the boat, and we were going to hang around, basically. Hang around where? Amsterdam. So when he has got the boat, did he tell you where the boat was going to be? Well, I knew we were going to Blankenberg. Did you? Well, I know now, so I presume I knew then. You say you presume then. There must have been, before you left England, a discussion about getting to Blankenberg. Have you ever been to Blankenberg before, Mr. Nichols? Before smuggling? Before the day you went to Amsterdam in your Golf convertible, Mr. Nichols? No. No. There must have been, if you like, a meeting when the plan to bring these drugs in, which you believed were going to be bought, was organised, right or wrong? Yes, we have had discussions about it, yeah. Did you have a torch with you in the Golf convertible? I presume we must have done, yeah. Presume anything. Did you have a torch in the Golf convertible, Mr. Nichols? I can't remember. You cannot remember. You do not say, quote, can't remember, when you are simply stuck, do you, Mr. Nichols? Like I said, if we didn't smuggle drugs that time, then, and I've never thought about it, you're asking me a question that no one's ever asked me. I am suggesting that you are having to make this up as you go along. Do you follow, Mr. Nichols? I follow what you're saying, but you're wrong. Did you have a radio? Like I say, we probably did. Where is that in the Golf convertible? It would have been in one of the bags, I presume. Before you set sail across the channel, Mr. Nichols, is it Folkestone? Is it not Folkestone to Ostend? I believe so, yeah. That is what you said, Mr. Nichols. Yeah. You must have loaded up this Golf convertible with the right equipment in order to get the signal to get the boat in when you drove to Blankenberg in this Golf convertible to unload the drugs that you were anticipating purchasing. Yeah, I can see that. So can you tell us whether you had the signalling equipment, Mr. Nichols? I personally never had the signalling equipment. Was it in the boot of your car, Mr. Nichols? I presume so, yes. You presume so, Mr. Nichols. So then you say, OK, no drugs. So Mr. Steele left all the money with a man he had never met before or spoke to before. Is that correct? Like I say, I presume they'd never spoke, but they looked like they'd never met. Now, the next trip is, you tell us, you went in a Peugeot, is that correct? Yes. Would you mind telling us, please, what you were wearing? I haven't got any idea. I would only be wearing tracksuit bottoms and t-shirts, or jeans and t-shirts. Tracksuit bottoms, jeans and t-shirt. Or jeans, that's all I ever generally wear. So off you go in the Peugeot, is that right? Tickets purchased in your name, and to Folkestone to Ostend, is that correct? I think so, yeah. I think so? It was, yeah. I think it was the same crossing. And the Peugeot has the registration number, as all Peugeots in England have registration numbers. What was the registration number of this vehicle? I can't recall. I'm sure it was a B registration. Pretty sure. B registration. But in 1996, when you were discussing these matters with DC Winston and DC Brown, your memory of car numbers was better. Is that a fair assumption? Yes. Do you believe that you remembered the numbers then? Some of it, if not all of it, probably. Have you still got the logbook for the Peugeot? No, I sold the Peugeot. To whom? Gordon Stevens. Did you give Gordon Stevens the logbook? I can't recall. We have heard in relation to the Passat that the logbook was never handed over. No, I said it was either in the glove box or it was handed over. Anyway, it would not have been possible for the police to have found out with your knowledge and Mr. Stevens' knowledge the registration number of that Peugeot, would it? No, it shouldn't have been difficult. Is there a ticket of that trip abroad with a ticket in your name? And that Peugeot, it was the number of the registration of the car that gets onto the ticket, does it not? I believe so, yeah. And have the police, Mr. Nichols, ever shown you a booking paid for by you with your name and the Peugeot's registration number? I don't think so. Anyway, off you go, and this time you are in luck, are you not? Because there are drugs to be purchased. Yes. So that we can remind ourselves the drugs were actually loaded into the Peugeot by a Dutchman in a Mercedes, is that correct? Yes. You said before they were loaded into the Peugeot that Stone had told you the price of drugs in guilders. Yes. And that had been worked out in terms of the exchange by you, is that correct? Yes. And we are talking about £80,000 worth translated into guilders for cannabis, is that correct? Yes. How many kilos again was it? 70? That would be about 70, yeah. And where was that put? You said it was put in the boot? Yes. The boot of the Peugeot. Mr. Nichols, did anyone weigh these drugs? No, well, I presume they did. Who is they, Mr. Nichols? The people we bought it off of. You are the buyer, are you not, Mr. Nichols? Yes. This is the first consignment, is it not, Mr. Nichols? Yes. Did you just trust the man in the Mercedes to deliver you 70 kilos of cannabis without a thought about looking at it or weighing it or anything like that? Basically, yes. That's very trustworthy, Mr. Nichols. Well, what else could I do? And you say this, do you not, Miss Nichols? I think I have got it right. The cannabis was loaded from one car to another by some flats which were just off the main road going out of Amsterdam. Is that correct, Mr. Nichols? Yes. And you say that you telephoned Mr. Steele, is that correct? Yes. And where was that? The first available place, which would be like a garage. Where was that? You say with great respect, the first available place. Where? Well, I don't know where. I know it's in Holland. Thank you. Were you following the Mercedes? Yes, we followed the Mercedes. So did you blink your lights to say, I have got to stop because I've got to ring up Mr. Steele? No, we only followed the Mercedes to the point where we swapped drugs. The road we swapped off was like a main road to where we wanted to go, basically. Anyway, Miss Nichols, you get to Blankenberg, do you? Yes. What time did you get to Blankenberg? Well, we were on time, that's all I can say. What time, Mr. Nichols? I can't be precise about what time. Light or dusk? No, still light, but on its way to darkness. What? Still light, but you know, on the time you'd hope it would start to get dark soon. Did the boat come in? No, the boat only came in darkness. So you waited until darkness? Yes. Okay, Miss Nichols, now, you then told us, and this is, I hope, the effect of what you told us, and you tell me if I've got anything wrong here, but you had to wade into the sea, is this correct? Yeah, I did. Up to your stomach? Yes. I think you showed us, is that correct, Miss Nichols? Up to your stomach? Yes. And you gesticulated to about here, roughly? Yes, about there, yeah. Thank you. And you got wet and you put your wet clothes into the car. Is that correct, Mr. Nichols? Yes, I did. Later on, you were stopped on the way to Calais, were you not, Mr. Nichols? Yes, I was, yeah. By a customs officer or was it a police officer? Both. I was stopped on the French-Belgian border by, I suppose, the police and at Calais by customs. And what did he do? Wave you down in your Peugeot? It was a border crossing, the police, and they basically stopped me, yeah. A border crossing, yes. What is the picture? It is now dark? Yeah, it's very dark. Middle of the night? Yes. And a customs officer or a police officer peered into your Peugeot, did he? Well, he stopped me and pulled me over to the side of the road. What did he see when he peered into your Peugeot, Mr. Nichols? Only me. And what were you wearing? Like I say, I can't recall, either jeans or a tracksuit, because that's all I ever wear. What had you taken off, Mr. Nichols? My wet clothes. I think the bottoms of my wet clothes were my tracksuit bottoms. So he would have seen a man in his underpants, Mr. Nichols. No, I put other clothes on. I asked you whether you were wearing jeans or tracksuit bottoms that were wet, because you had got wet up to the position which my lord has got the shorthand writer making a note of, up to your stomach here, Mr. Nichols. Yes. So what were you wearing when the man flashed his torch into your Peugeot? I put dry clothes on. My wet clothes were in the boot. When did you think of taking dry clothes with you, Mr. Nichols? Well, they were spare clothes. Because you see, Mr. Nichols, now, I asked you right at the beginning in relation to this what you had taken with you, and you made no mention of a second pair of clothing. Did you, Mr. Nichols? You didn't mention that to us earlier on in this piece? No. Why would you have thought of taking a spare pair of clothes on your trip to Amsterdam in your Peugeot? Was this because you did not anticipate getting wet, did you? I don't believe that was an anticipation of yours. Well, I thought I might get a little bit wet because of taking, you know, the drugs to the water's edge. Did you? So in preparation of that, you had a spare set of what? I had some other clothes with me. What the police officer or the customs police officer would have seen would have been this on any basis. Some wet clothes, a torch, a radio. No, the torch and radio were put in the bags with the drugs and the stuff, you know, and, you know, to go onto the boat. So all he would have seen were some wet clothes, is that right? Yes. Mr. Nichols, when you look, please, at the bundle of photos, would you look at photograph 4? I am asking you now, please, about the trip that you went across. You say the North Sea in a rib boat. Yes. That was a trip in which, at the end of it, you say the Range Rover had got stuck on a wooden post. Yes. Is that the Range Rover? I presume so. Take your time and look at it. Do you recognise it, Mr. Nichols? If it's a light blue... Yeah, it looks light blue. It looks like it could be Jack's Range Rover, yeah. That trip took place, and you said it in, you know, you said this more than once in the summer months. That this you remember saying took place when Mr. Corey was on holiday. Is that correct? Yes. So we are talking the summer of 1995? 1995, yeah. And by summer, do we mean August, September? Okay, now, Mr. Nichols, if you could just look again, would you, and study this photograph. If I could ask you, please, Mr. Nichols, this is the Range Rover. Is it the light blue Range Rover? It's not a very good picture, but I presume so, yeah. You are good at looking at cars, are you not, Mr. Nichols? I don't know. In what respect? Look at the photograph. Photograph 6 further on, please. That is it it not? It looks very similar to the other one, yeah. You, however, looking at the photograph at page 4, say that is the Range Rover, do you? No, I'm saying that it looks like it. Do you not recognise, you see it has got a number plate here, Delta Echo Sierra 36 Victor? Yes. That is the sort of number plate that would stick in your mind, would it not, Mr. Nichols? I would think so, yeah. So if it has stuck in your mind, do you know the history of that car, that Range Rover, Mr. Nichols? I know the history of the Range Rover that Jack owns, yeah. Do you know the history of this Range Rover? I don't think so, no. Are you saying that this Range Rover that got stuck in the sand is not this Range Rover? It looks like the Range Rover that got stuck in the sand. It is the right colour, yeah. Are you a bit worried about committing yourself to this Range Rover that got stuck in the sand, Mr. Nichols? No, it's the right colour, you know. Okay, Miss Nichols, well, it's clearly got, in a sense here, a personalised number plate, has it not? Yes. One that you would have seen as you were watching attempts being made to pull it out from this wooden post, would you not? Well, it wouldn't have been the last thing on my mind, the number plate. Did you say the last thing? Well, I wouldn't have been thinking, what's the registration of this? But you have got a brain that focuses on numbers, have you not, Mr. Nichols? I'm quite good at remembering numbers, yeah. Are you worried about committing yourself to that Range Rover, Mr. Nichols? Well, it looks about the same colour as Jack's Range Rover, so you know. You see, I suggest to you that the Range Rover was not acquired by Mr. Womes until the 25th of October. No? I'll take your word for that. Thank you. In which case, it cannot be the Range Rover that got stuck on the post in the sand, can it? I suppose so. I don't understand. I have asked you, and I think you have suggested this may well be, I hope I summarise it fairly, the Range Rover that got stuck in the post on the sand in the summer of 1995. If it is the Range Rover, it could have been owned by someone else, but driven by Mr. Womes. You think Mr. Womes had borrowed it, potentially? No, I didn't say that. I said it could have been owned by someone else. If it was stuck in the sand and Mr. Womes was driving it, then my suggestion on your behalf is correct, is it not, Mr. Nichols? Well, you see, the Range Rover that he became the owner of came from Mr. Steele, which came from me indirectly. Then you know when you gave it and sold it to Mr. Steele, Mr. Nichols. Well, I never actually see the Range Rover when Mr. Steele became the owner, no. Okay, Mr. Nichols, if we could now focus our attention on the trip. This was a windy, stormy trip, is that correct? Yeah, in the middle, yeah. What? In the middle, the crossing in the middle. And as you appreciated, point clear, the wind died down, but the sea did not just become a mill pond, did it? No. And you tell us that you were able to tie that boat to your leg and fall asleep on the shingle, is that correct? Yes. It was an incoming tide? Yes. How long do you think you were asleep for, Mr. Nichols? I can't say. I mean, when you fall asleep and wake up, you don't know if you've been asleep a minute or... Well, roughly. Just give us an estimation, Mr. Nichols. It felt like quite a while. I don't know. An hour? An hour? Yeah. Just look at number 5, would you please, in the bundle, and the photograph of Mr. Steele in his boat. You told us, Mr. Nichols, that the boat was lying sideways on the scene, did you not? What do you mean? Where was the boat when it was round your foot, Mr. Nichols? It was in the sea. And you went to sleep. I'm not trying to tie you down to anything specific, but you went to sleep for some time. Yes. Were you woken up by an oncoming tide and this boat going over your head, Mr. Nichols? No. No, because if that boat was around your foot and the waves were still waves and there was an incoming tide, you would not be able to sleep on a beach with a boat for that long. The weight and the incoming tide would have prevented this. Do you understand, Mr. Nichols? I don't understand what you're saying. I mean, you know, it had a rope on it and, you know. Okay, Mr. Nichols, and how long was this rope? I can't recall, but it gave me the opportunity that the boat was in the water and I wasn't. Did you say you do not understand? No, I understand what you're saying, but the waves would wash the boat up and onto the beach. But do you not agree that that is what the waves would do on an incoming tide? Like I said, there wasn't particularly anything wavy about the sea or anything like that. It was in the estuary. Mr. Nichols, you told me that there were still waves, that the wind had come down, but the sea was still choppy. Well, I said it wasn't like a mill pond, yes. If we look at point clear, just look at photograph 9. It's where you were lying on the beach, roughly where that red boat is that correct? Yeah, roughly, yeah. And the tide is coming in and you are asleep and this boat with the Yamaha engine. How long is the boat? About 20 foot long. 20 foot long. And it's an incoming tide with the sea still, the remains of the storm still bustling around you, and you managed to sleep through it all, is that right? I was asleep, yes. And that is the whole truth, is it, Mr. Nichols? Yes. So you woke up cold and damp, and the boat was still in the same position, was it? Sort of the same position as when you fell asleep? Well, the boat was connected to the rope, yeah, connected to my foot. You did not have a sore ankle or anything like that with a rope around it and an incoming tide? No. It is a fantasy, is it not, Mr. Nichols? No, it's not. Let us see if you can tell the jury about this. You say, do you, that Mr. Reed had no idea that you were on a drug smuggling operation at any stage? I don't think he did, no. Try, if possible, to be specific. When you say you do not think he did, do I take it from you that you never told him? That's right, yeah. Insofar as you think, is that because he now has got a vague suspicion? I think so, yes. When you said to Mr. Reed, I'm going to Amsterdam today, what did you actually call him for? What did you actually call him? Fran, Franny, or what? Well, any of these. Which one? Or both? Both. What did you say? Franny, I'm off to Amsterdam for the day. Would you like to come? No, I said to him, do you want to come along for a drive? He has got nothing else to do, Mr. Nichols? No, he's on the dole. So he said, yeah, I'll come to Amsterdam. Did you say why you were going to Amsterdam, Mr. Nichols? Well, I don't recall if I told him anything, no. He must have said something along the lines of, why are you going to Amsterdam? Must he? Well, yeah, I presume so, but I don't recall what I said to him. I know I never said to him anything about drug smuggling. Okay, Mr. Nichols, and which month are we actually talking about? It is when Peter Corey is on holiday. So we are talking about the summer, are we? Summer holiday, yeah. Did you say, Mr. Nichols, well, I really like Amsterdam in the summer, and I'm going to the museums and for a walk along the canals. And Mr. Reed said, well, let's go to Amsterdam today. Is that the sort of conversation that you had? No. Did Mr. Reed say, well, what are you going to do in Amsterdam? No. Because I do not wish to sound rude about Amsterdam, but I gather you were not going to see the 18th century pictures in a museum in Amsterdam, were you, Mr. Nichols? I wouldn't know where to start looking. Nor would Mr. Reed, Mr. Nichols. I don't think so. In Amsterdam, there are really two things associated with Amsterdam. Let's be straight here, Mr. Nichols. One of those is drugs and the other is women. Yeah, and diamonds. Diamonds. Did Mr. Reed express any interest in either of the three? He probably did. He probably did. Well, these must have been some of the sort of conversations getting a man to go to Amsterdam with you in the summer of 1995 about the purpose of going. Was it two lads that were going to be interested in one of two things I have just mentioned? Well, he would have come along for that reason, yeah. What reason was it, Mr. Nichols? He came with me because I asked him to. I'm trying to forget why you persuaded him to come, Mr. Nichols. But because he's unemployed, just hanging around Braintree doing nothing. It's just something else to do. When he got to Amsterdam, he did not have anything to do with the drugs, did he, Mr. Nichols? No. Because you swear on the Bible that is the one he was not going to have anything to do with, Mr. Nichols. Yes. He did not have anything to do with women either, did he, Mr. Nichols? So far as I'm aware. And the next thing that happens to Mr. Reed is he ends up not coming back from Amsterdam on the usual route. He ends up at about 10 o'clock at night on a beach in Blankenberg, does he not, Mr. Nichols? Look, I couldn't say the time, but he doesn't end up on the beach, no. He ends up in Blankenberg when it was dark, Mr. Nichols. Yes. Mr. Reed has gone to Amsterdam. We are not quite sure why, and he suddenly finds himself in the dark on a beach. That is not right. The witness has just said, not on the beach. But now he is on the beach in the dark, Mr. Nichols. Yes. In a place called Blankenberg, is that correct? Yes. Which is not the normal way back from Amsterdam, is it, Mr. Nichols? I suppose not. Pardon my ignorance, Mr. Nichols, but not everyone who goes to Amsterdam for the day ends up in the dark in a beach in Blankenberg, do they, Mr. Nichols? I'd say not everyone, no. Did he ask you why you were there? Again, I can't recall. I may have told him that I was, doing something and he should just stay away for an hour. Fishing, perhaps? No, I didn't say anything pathetic like that. We must have said something to him. He must have been slightly curious, finding himself in Blankenberg in the dark. He was very curious, yes. So what did you say to him, Mr. Nichols? I said it's best he doesn't know. What? It's best he doesn't know. Is this the picture? Because I just want to see the picture that suddenly from his point of view you disappear into the dark towards the sea. No, I showed him where I was going and then I took him back to one of the cafes near the marinas and just left him there. But you did not know, did you, that Mr. Steele, on your version, was going to ask you to come in the boat? No. So you then had to tell him to drive back to England on his own, I suppose? Yes. And so this is right, you gave him your passport, you told us? Yes. So here is Mr. Reed, gone for a day trip to Amsterdam, and suddenly his friend in Blankenberg is giving him a passport and telling him to drive back on his own and disappear into the middle of the night. Is that correct, Mr. Nichols? Yes. Did he say or ask what is going on? Yes. And what did you say to him, Mr. Nichols? I said it's best he doesn't know and I'll see him back in England. Because you had to get your passport back from him, did you not, Mr. Nichols? At some point, yeah. Because he worked for, who was it, DWT Interiors, did he not? No, he helped me when I worked for them. Well, he worked there when you worked there, is that correct? Yes, he worked for me. Okay, Mr. Nichols, and when did you actually get your passport back from him? I don't recall. The next time I saw him, I suppose. The next time you saw him, did he say what was going on? Yeah. 1 minute you're here, the next you disappear into the sea, it's pitch black, he's got your passport. Did he ask you how you got home that night? Yeah. And what did you say, Mr. Nichols? Well, I said, well, look, I think he guessed, not how I got home, but he guessed what I was doing there. He guessed what you were doing. I think he guessed, yeah. How did he think you got back, Mr. Nichols? We never discussed it as far as I'm aware. You are telling us the whole truth about this, are you, Mr. Nichols? Yes. You must have told him you had gone back by boat if he has been given your wallet. And the lot's near the beach in Blankenberg. That is the truth, is it not? Yes. Why do you not tell us the truth, Mr. Nichols? Well, I didn't ever tell him what I did. If he guessed it or, I thought he knew, that's one thing, but I never actually said to him that's what I did. When you have got your passport back, I've got my wallet back. What about your passport, Mr. Nichols? Like I say, my passport is just folded up and kept in my wallet. Okay, now my question, Mr. Nichols, is did he not ask you then what was going on that night? Yes, he did. And what did you tell him, Mr. Nichols? I said it was better he doesn't know what was going on. When I began to ask you questions this morning, Mr. Nichols, I asked you about the phrase that you gave, namely this, in respect of being recruited, as you describe it. To become involved in this drug operation, you used the phrase, quote, the topic was first mentioned, and I was asked if I wanted to go abroad and buy drugs and make money. You said the topic was first mentioned in the presence of Mr. Steele, obviously, and Mr. Womes. Where was this? Discussions that we had when Mr. Steele and Mr. Womes were in the workshop at Brightlingsea. In the unit. I'm asking you specifically where and when the topic was first mentioned, Mr. Nichols. Well, look, I think it was at the unit in Brightlingsea. You think, Mr. Nichols? Well, yeah, I was asked. I just think I can remember the unit at Brightlingsea. And it was you mentioned that Mr. Steele was putting, obviously, his trust in you, was he not? Yes. And when it was mentioned, did you say fine, great, or what? Yes, I agreed. And the plot was it not, that you were going to act as the agent, the negotiator on your version under Corey for Mr. Steele, Mr. Womes, is that correct? Mr. Steele, I never said. You were going to be the buyer in Amsterdam, Mr. Nichols, were you not? Yes. And so they had, Mr. Steele, total confidence in you? I suppose so, yes. And that confidence was such that when it came to the importation concerning Mr. Tate, Mr. Steele was informing you, because you were counting the money, that Mr. Tate was part of the syndicate? Yeah, I suppose so, yeah. And you then said, Mr. Nichols, that you sat there with Mr. Womes counting the money, is that correct? And Mr. Steele and Mr. Corey, yes. I suggest to you that this is a complete fantasy. No, sorry, it's correct. I see. What were the denomination of the notes? All sorts. This was a big deal, was it? £125,000 worth of grass was to be bought? It was a big deal, yeah. £125,000 of grass was to be bought, Mr. Nichols. Like I said, the preference was grass, if he could get it. But because he had a good time with stuff that he had got previously, so that's why they decided they wanted to get grass. £125,000 of grass was the deal, was it not, Mr. Nichols? As I just said, when we went there, he was hoping that we'd be able to buy grass, but we didn't. Did he tell you that he had rung Mr. Stone and Mr. Stone said, yes, I have got £125,000 worth of grass in this syndicate? As far as I'm aware, no. So here was a deal. There had been other deals before, admittedly, with a syndicate involving people like Tate, and you are saying that the deal in terms of what was happening with Stone had not been set up, to use one of your favourite words. No, I'm not saying that. As far as I'm aware, he had said, get grass if you can. So he didn't know if there was definitely going to be grass there. Is that right? He said, get grass if you can? Yeah, his preference was grass. Okay, Mr. Nichols, and he didn't say that the deal was to get grass and only when you get there that you independently negotiated with him, Mr. Nichols? I don't recall, but I know when I was going there it was to get grass if possible. How many kilos was envisaged would be bought for £125,000, Mr. Nichols? Grass was about 1,000 a kilo, so 125. 125, Mr. Nichols. Was that the figure that you were supposed to buy on behalf of the syndicate? Like I say, it's all down to the pounds and exchange rate, to the guilders, but basically it worked out about £1,000 a kilo. Suddenly the syndicate wanted to know how many kilos they were getting for their price. Yes. So was there a figure including you working out the exchange rate of how many kilos the syndicate expected to receive? Yeah, roughly. And roughly how many, Mr. Nichols? About £1,000 a kilo, about 125. So off you go, and you say that Mr. Stone directed you as to where you should park the Toledo. Yes. How was contact made between you and him? Well, he just walked off and left us sitting in the car. How originally was contact made, Mr. Nichols? In the morning, we went to his bar. And then you saw 3 men walking down the road carrying 5 cardboard boxes, is that correct? About 5, yeah. Which road were these men walking down? They were walking up the rear, towards the rear of the car. In this busy street? No. Sort of an alleyway? Yeah, like a side road, yeah. What sort of cardboard boxes were these, Mr. Nichols? Just plain square cardboard boxes. And these 5 boxes were put into the boot of the car, yes? Yeah. Nothing was weighed or anything like that? No. And you say that you ended up speaking to Jack on his mobile phone, is that correct, Mr. Nichols? I think so, yeah. That is what you said, Mr. Nichols. Well, you know, I think that's what I did, yeah. Now, Mr. Nichols, you and the police have had records together of the itemised billing of your mobile. Jack Wome's mobile, Steele's mobile, Tate's mobile, and yet no one can find that call, can they? Well, I presume they've got a record from a Dutch landline to his mobile. They would have his record. We cannot find a record, can we, of a call that went to Mr. Wome's mobile from any landline, can we, Mr. Nichols? I don't know, sorry. You don't know? No one said to me. Has any police officer asked you to try to locate a call that would get to Jack Wome's mobile from whatever landline in Holland? No. No? Not as far as I'm aware. We will come to it later. There was an interview 7, when the police had a whole series of documents of itemised billing. Do you remember that? Yeah. Yes? They showed me phone bills, yeah. Now, Mr. Nichols, they showed you phone calls and they were asking you if you could locate the call. This is in relation to the 6th. They were asking you to locate the call that you say was the call that was Mr. Steele ringing you to ask you to come to Mark's Tay. Do you remember that? Yes. Anyway, let's keep with this for the moment. These men arrive with the 5 boxes. put into the boot, and off you go to Blankenberg. What time did you arrive in Blankenberg, approximately? Just about on time. I mean, I know you will say what time, but we were on time. Around 10 o'clock, Mr. Nichols? No, it was before dark. It was just on the verge of starting to turn dark. Were the shops shut? No. Blankenberg. What is it? A small seaside resort, is it not? Yes. What time do the supermarkets stay open till? I haven't got a clue. I ask you that because you say that you repacked the drugs having gone to the supermarket and purchased some bags. Yes, or a bag, yeah. Well, that is what I want to know. How many bags did you buy, Mr. Nichols? We bought some black bags, you know, like rough refuge sacks, I suppose you'd call them, and like a holdall. How many bags was that? The black sacks? I don't know. Roughly, Mr. Nichols. Whatever you get in a pack of black bags, 10, 20, I don't know. How many sacks did the 5 boxes of drugs get into? It didn't work like that. The little sports bag I bought, I put my clothing in, and because I had a big bag with me, like a big head or Jaguar bag, we put the black bags, the open like sacks in the bag, and then put the drugs in the black bags in my bag. Does that make sense at all? What then happened was that the drugs in the 5 bags got mixed up as they were put into these other bags. Is that correct? From the boxes to the bags, yes. That is right, is it not, Mr. Nichols? Yes. So everything was mixed up, was it not? Yes. Because you see, later on you say to Steele that all the drugs that you had, to use your words, were total shit. Yes. You also say that all the drugs that Mr. Steele had were total shit. Yes, I think I know what you're talking about. And there was a report you told us that Steele was complaining that his drugs were shit. Is that correct, Mr. Nichols? Do you mean Tate? Pat Tate? Yes. You then said Stone had told Steele that he had been accidentally given the wrong stuff. Is that correct, Mr. Nichols? Yes. But that a third of this product was actually good. That's what he said, yeah. There was a discussion about the third of it coming back to Amsterdam, and you told us that Mr. Steele was saying that you want it back because I want my money back and you can get it, and did not get it back. Is that correct, Mr. Nichols? It wasn't the third. No, it was the drugs. The drugs, but Mr. Stone believed that a third of those drugs were good. Is that correct? He said they were good, yeah. You know, he said to us that a third of the drugs were good, yeah. And you say, do you not, Mr. Nichols, that Mr. Steele thought that Pat had him over because Pat had sold some of the drugs which were part of the drugs that were in fact good. Is that correct? No, it just worked out that Pat had to give back so much out of what he took, but it just worked out that he had not given back about a third of the amount. It follows that if we are right here, that Pat Tate happened to have the proportion of drugs which were good. Is that correct? Yes. Nobody else did they? No. So, Mr. Nichols, it follows from what you tell us that although the drugs get mixed up and they are taken from the 5 boxes, the one person and the only one person who got the good drugs was Tate. Yes. So is it a coincidence, is it, that Tate was the only one who got the good drugs? Well, I say mixed up. I'm just saying that, you know. We opened the box and put the whole contents of the box in the bag. Opened another box and put that into a bag. So if there was a box of good stuff, it would have been together. I'm sorry, I thought you agreed with me that once the taking of the drugs out of the boxes into the bags, they'd all been mixed up together. Is that correct, Mr. Nichols? Yeah, but I mean, you make it feel that I poured 5 boxes into the boot of the car, mixed them up one at a time and put them into bags randomly. What I'm saying is that the bag was opened, the black sack was put in the bag, and then a box of stuff was poured into the bag. So if one of the boxes was good, it would have remained with itself. Even though it might have been mixed with other drugs, it would have remained together. It would have been parcelled together. And it just so happened, Mr. Nichols, that at the end of the day, Tate happened to get the good one. Is that what you're saying? That was presumed, yeah. Well, it was more than presumed because this was the thing you say that has actually upset Mr. Steele. Is that correct? Yes. Mr. Stone also believed, did he, that there were good drugs amongst the bad drugs? Mr. Stone said that he was saying that a third of it was good, yeah. A third was good. Just answer this. When you went back with Mr. Steele, did you get, whether it was in guilders or whether it was in pounds or a mixture of both, did you get all of the money back? Yes, we did. If that is right, Mr. Stone has given you all of your money back, plus the benefit of a third of £125,000 worth of good drugs. Is that correct? Well, I felt they couldn't have been any good, really, or he wouldn't have given the money back. So when Stone, if this is right, was saying a third of these drugs are good, he was lying, was he? Well, I don't know, do I? I mean, originally he said there was nothing wrong with the drugs. It must be a mistake. And then he changed to say a third of it was good. So, I mean, he's told one thing 1 second and then something else, another. You are not finding it at all difficult to accept that Mr. Stone gives all the money back and yet still believes a third, which is £45,000 worth of these drugs, were good, which Tate happened to have. Like I say, that's if they were good. Because the phrase you used that Stone was saying they got mixed up, some were good, some were not. Is that correct, is it not, Mr. Nichols? Yes. Not only that, of course, Mr. Steele, who meets Mr. Tate on your version at Ostend, Tate got all of his money back, his share of the £70,000. Is that correct? Yes. So Mr. Steele, who believed that Tate had had the benefit of the good drugs, is that right? Yes. So he was being very generous because he was giving Tate back his whole share, believing that Tate himself had some good drugs which he must have sold out for a profit. He presumed that, yeah. That's very generous, Mr. Nichols. I've never really thought about it. It follows, though, does it not? Yeah, I suppose. It must have been very generous of Mr. Steele to give Tate back all of the money that he put up, believing that Tate himself had the good drugs, Mr. Nichols, no? Right? Yes. When you went, as you say you did, with Mr. Steele to Stone's caff to get the money back, you say that you went there and there was 30,000 first of all, and then another 30,000 and guilders, and you sort of hung about. Do you remember all of this? Yes. Was there a discussion with Mr. Steele and Mr. Stone about how it came about that he had gone to the business of importing a massive amount of duff cannabis? In what respect? Well, this cannabis has been brought into England. Attempts have been made to sell it. Word has got back to him that it's duff cannabis. Mr. Steele's gone to all this hassle to bring in some of the drugs with your assistance, which turn out to be rubbish, Mr. Nichols. Yeah. Did you hear Mr. Steele voice some unhappiness about buying roughly £125,000 worth, possibly less a third, of bad cannabis, selling it around only to have to give the money back, and going to all this performance for goods which would not be of merchandisable quality? I can't recall if they had any arguments. I don't think they had any arguments. I think they were just happy to get their money back. Surely Mr. Steele must have been furious with this man for selling him all this stuff, and which resulted in him having to come back and taking his big boat back to Blankenberg. He must have been livid, wasn't he? I don't recall him being upset. Like I say, he was happy to just get the money back. There are points I suggest that you simply have not worked out in your mind, Mr. Nichols, because you have not asked yourself what obviously would have happened if it did happen, Mr. Nichols, which I suggest that it did. You haven't asked yourself the question of what would have happened when Tate discovered that he had. Okay, Mr. Nichols, now, the question that I wish to ask you is, did Mr. Steele ask Mr. Stone how he, Mr. Stone, knew or believed that a third of that cannabis was good? No, I don't recall. Because there was no doubt that that was what Mr. Steele had been told, was it not? Yeah, he was told that, like, John Stone said that a third of it was good, yes. When do you say that he was told that? Are you talking about in Amsterdam or some other time? No, when we first thought it was all bad, and John Stone was saying, no, a third of it's good, I'm sure, sort of thing. When you got there, was there a conversation to the effect that you are not having all of your money back because a third of it is good? No. So Mr. Stone was going to give back the lot, having told Steele that a third of it was perfectly good? I don't recall him going on about it afterwards. Mr. Steele said he was giving all the drugs back anyway. But that never happened, did it, Mr. Nichols? No, it never. Now, he knew, Mr. Nichols, that he was not going to give all the drugs back because you told us last week that he was not going to take responsibility for shipping them back to Amsterdam. That's right, someone was meant to collect them. These drugs were not in their original form at all, were they? I don't understand. They had all been broken, but they are still drugs. As I understand your evidence, you had been hunting these drugs around Essex and goodness knows where else, and had been told that they were, to use your phrase, shit. They could not all be collected up and put into some bags and taken back to Stone's Calf, could they? No, they had been broken, yes. So the concept of bringing them back, like you bring back a dress if it has got a stain on it, if you have bought it in Marks and Spencer's, you take it back to the shop. That concept could not possibly have worked, could it, in respect of drugs in Essex going back to Mr. Stone in Amsterdam? Oh, I don't see what you mean. We were going to give the drugs back. I don't see how. We weren't taking them back, but we were going to give them back. What is the difference, Mr. Nichols? Well, they were going to collect them in England. What? They were going to collect them in England. Go around all the punters? No, we'd supposedly said we've collected it, we've got all the drugs back. They weren't going to go around to individual people and collect the drugs physically. A roundup of all these drugs, was there? Well, yeah, by the people that distribute them, like me. All these people, this is all a sort of criminal underworld, is it not? These are all criminals, Mr. Nichols. They're drug dealers, yeah. Why do you smile when you say the word criminal underworld? Is it not in your view? No, they are drug dealers in my view. I see. Drug dealers are not criminals, is that right? Well, you said criminal underworld. I'm not quite sure what that means. They do not operate in the open, do they, Mr. Nichols? Well, I suppose not. So what happens then, Mr. Nichols? Do they turn up at a pub and say, look, here's my duff cannabis? Another one says, here's my duff cannabis? And they put it on the table in the pub and say, right, we want all of our kilos back. Is that what happens? No. Would you look, please, at this document so that you can see it, Mr. Nichols? I want you to see what this document is. It starts with a page number. That is the page of the custody record. You know, Mr. Nichols, do you not, what a custody record is? It's a document which monitors what happens to anyone in a police station. Yes. And you can see in the next column the dates. You can also see the next column from and to, i.e. the time and the length of time. Can you see that? Yes. Can you see the names of police officers in the right-hand column? You can see the word interview. Those are the interviews, most of which the jury have in their bundle. We know that you were arrested on the 13th. We know that you were arrested for murder during the first interview, in which you made no comment. And we know that you were then interviewed on the 14th and onwards. We can see that the interviews at the right-hand side and the times. We can see the officers who interviewed you, and when you were more or less spoken to by Brian Winston. Do you agree with that? Yes. And we can see that you were receiving welfare visits from the 15th of May by Brian Winston. Do you see? Yes, I do. 16th of May, Brian Winston? Yes. And that's before your next interview, if you look at number 23. That is how it is, the custody record. And the 17th, you have been visited on the 16th by those self-same officers, have you not? Yes, I have. Okay, Miss Nichols, now, if we just turn over the page, on the 18th, there's a request for welfare. Page 31, a black and white TV was supplied to you. Still on the 18th, there was a visit of 20 minutes by Brian Winston, and another visit on the 20th by DC Story. There is an interview on the 20th, that is the interview, actually interview 10 I believe it is, when you are being asked questions about your role in the murder. And it is put to you, I do not know if you remember, that you were actually party to this murder. Do you remember? No, I don't. I will remind you later, after which you are de-arrested for the murder. It is on the 21st of May that you supply your first witness statement. Is that correct? Yes. When you supplied that witness statement, Mr. Nichols, you realised that you had to give evidence, did you not? Sorry? When you supplied a witness statement, you realised on the 21st of May that you would need to supply a witness statement as evidence. Is that correct? Yeah, I think I realised that before then, but yeah. Okay, Mr. Nichols, now, when did you realise that you were going to be giving evidence? Well, I was a protected witness, so I suppose, you know, a witness gives evidence. When did you realise that you were not just giving information? We have seen in interview 3 when you ask and they say that these tapes will not be made generally public. When did you actually realise that you were going to be giving information and to be a protected witness? Probably soon after that. Soon after. So you realise when you were being interviewed from interview 4 onwards, roughly? No, when I got the solicitor, so interview 5. Interview 5, it's there that you realised that you would be giving evidence in court, did you? Yes. Interview 5 being on the 17th of May in the morning as we go along from item 36, when you have been de-arrested because you had been de-arrested for the murder before you could become a witness, is that correct? I presume so. They had to stop keeping you under arrest for murder before you become a protected witness and giving evidence that other people are guilty of the murder, but you were not. Is that the correct assumption of what was happening here? I don't know the procedure. From then on, did you see another officer concerned in your welfare, Detective Sergeant Kraling? Yes. His name, as we flick down this list on page 2, begins to appear more and more in connection with welfare, does it not? We see item 39, page 39. He spends 1 hour and 15 minutes with you discussing your welfare. Yes. So, for example, if we took the 23rd of May, 12:45 p.m, a colour television replaced with a black and white one at 2 o'clock, 1400 hours, 14:45, 45 minutes of welfare with Brian Winston. At 21:15 that evening, Kraling comes to see you and discusses your welfare. Is that correct? Yes. Okay, and if we go over to page 41 of the custody record, you spend 2 hours and 20 minutes on the 24th of May, welfare with Kraling. At the same time on the 24th of May between 1945 and 2050, 1 hour and 5 minutes, that was again with Kraling, is that right? Yes. 25th of May you see Kraling, the times are quite reasonable on the custody record, and again you see Winston and Brown for some time. It looks as though it is 11:05 to 12 o'clock, is that right? Yes. The 25th again, Kraling turns up. On the 26th you see Kraling for 25 minutes, then you see Brown for an hour and a half, and you then see Kraling for 55 minutes. On the 27th there's 50 minutes first of all with Kraling, 1 hour and 50 minutes with Brian Winston, then later on 50 minutes with Kraling. So it goes on, does it not? For example, on the 26th, you have a short visit by Kraling, and you have 35 minutes with Kraling, and then you have 2 hours and 20 minutes with Winston. The next page, page 28, goes on with these visits, which last a long time, do they not? Quite often, do you agree? Sorry, which one? A lot of these visits last over an hour, do they not, Mr. Nichols? Yes. Now look at number 49. Brian Winston on the 13th spends 1 hour and 4 minutes with you, do they not? That's to be followed by Kraling, etc. Yes, some of them go over an hour, yeah. Okay, Miss Nichols, now as we get to page 5, the 31st of May, Winston sees you and Brown for 2 hours and 7 minutes, to be followed at 19:15 by Kraling, spending 55 minutes with you as welfare, is that correct? Yes. And we have only got to look down at that page to see the length of the time of those visits. It's 1 hour and 50 minutes, 1 hour and 30 minutes, 1 hour and 5 minutes. Item 56, 1 hour and 20 minutes. Welfare, and then Story comes along, DC Story. This officer connected with being in charge of this case. And he discusses cars and wages and a Winnebago, etc., etc. for 1 hour and 5 minutes with you. Is that correct? Yes, he did, yeah. And what is a Winnebago, Mr. Nichols, out of curiosity? It's a motorhome. Now, if you go over the page into June, it goes on. Lots of cribbage, lots of welfare, Mr. Nichols, as you can see on page 6, that right up to the 6th of June, having been visited for hours, day after day by Brown and Winston, you are still being interviewed, are you not? Yes. So you are being interviewed by the same officers that are spending hours with you, literally, on a day-to-day basis. Yes. Now, one must assume, Mr. Nichols, that during this time you were being interviewed under caution, were you not? I presume so, yeah. So it says at the beginning of these interviews that that is the case. What exactly was Crayling talking to you about? He was just someone that played cribbage and went down the shops with me to get my food and things like that. KFC chicken? Did you have that? Yes. Taco chips? Well, whatever, yeah. Hot chocolate before you went to bed? Yes. And insofar as one could be comfortable in a police station and have the food that you wished, the hot chocolate before you went to bed, you were being given the VIP treatment, were you not, Mr. Nichols? Yeah, they got me whatever food I wanted. Sometimes did you go to a gym, or did they bring some gymnastic equipment and you would jump around in your cell with it? They bought me a ball and, like my sister, gave me a multi-gym. A what, Mr. Nichols? Multi-gym, like some, like benches and some weights. There you were in whichever station it was with your weights, your taco chips, your KFC, and if you wanted a hot chocolate before you went to bed, you only had to ask for it. Is that what is going on here, Mr. Nichols? Well, anyone could have a drink, yeah. Must be wonderful to be arrested, Mr. Nichols. Well, I got the food I wanted because they haven't got provision to look after people in the police station. Do all prisoners in police stations have that facility, or don't you know? I think the assumption is most people in police stations don't, because they're not there for very long. They just get up, the standard frozen meal and whatever they serve up. Crayling was looking after your welfare, Mr. Nichols, was he? Yes. What were Winston and Brown doing? They used to come and visit me and talk to me. About what, Mr. Nichols? Can't recall anything. Why did you need two welfare groups of visitors? I don't know. Boredom. They just come to visit me. Now, they were not just discussing your welfare for 1.5 hours or 2.5 hours, were they, Mr. Nichols? Yeah. Well, they were not discussing whether you wanted KFC or a kebab, were they? No, we just generally talk about anything really. Cars, what was going to happen to me in the future. Exactly, they were talking about your future. Well, sometimes, yeah. They were talking about you giving evidence, were they not? Sometimes, yeah. They were talking about the fact that having made a witness statement, you had to come to a court and give evidence concerning the matters that were in your witness statement. The first one, which is the 21st of May, that went on to the 22nd of May, Mr. Nichols. Well, no, it was mentioned they'd just come and visit me for my welfare. You had Crayling to help you with your welfare, Miss Nichols. He was your independent welfare officer, was he not? That was supposed to be his job, yeah. There is no reason for Brown to spend 1.5 hours discussing your welfare as well, was there? Well, it's just they'd come to cheer me up, Cheer you up? What was happening, Mr. Nichols, was this. To put it colloquially, you were about to become a grass. A witness, yeah. You know the word, Mr. Nichols. You're about to become a grass. I think they're called witnesses, yeah. Not all witnesses are grasses. Well, can you tell me the difference? Yes, Mr. Nichols, a woman police officer who goes to the scene of a crime and collects all of the exhibits is not a grass. You know what a grass is, Mr. Nichols, do you not? It's someone that gives information, a witness, yeah. It is someone who gives information about other people allegedly involved in crimes which they are also involved in or connected to. That is what a grass is. Surely you know what a grass is, Mr. Nichols. Yeah. That is why you are becoming a protected witness, is it not? Yes. Because you had agreed to be a grass. I'd agreed to be an informer, yeah. I'd agreed to be a witness. An informer is one thing. An informer is the person in interview 3 that is giving information and saying to the police that this is not for the public. That is an informer, is it not? A grass is someone who has got to come to court and give, in quote, Queen's evidence, is the phrase. That is what they were nurturing you to be, was it not? Well, I was going to be an informer, yeah, and to come to court and give information. And would it be fair to say, Mr. Nichols, that you were nervous? Extremely, yeah. And they were nervous, were they not? Well, they were nervous because they didn't think I'd do it. Exactly. That is why after each interview or before the next, you were seen by the self-same police officers who were interviewing you, pushing you gently along. That is what was going on, Mr. Nichols, was it not? No. Well, what was going on, Mr. Nichols? Like I said, they were there just to cheer me up, really, and to make me feel better. You were entering, were you not, to your knowledge that, and their encouragement, obviously, the no man's land of the grass? I was doing something that no one would tell me about, yes. Doing something that what? That no one would give me any information about, no assurances of what might happen to me or anything like that. I have not asked you about assurances, Mr. Nichols. No, I'm just saying that I was doing something which I was unsure of the outcome. You were making as sure as you could what the outcome would be, were you not, Mr. Nichols? I don't understand. Well, one thing you were trying to make certain is whether you would get a reduction in sentence by giving this evidence, were you not? Well, it is said that you get a reduction in sentence for... You must have discussed for hours how much you would get off if you gave evidence in this court, which would inevitably get back to the boys in Braintree. My barrister discussed it with me, yeah. You had to make a decision, did you not, as to whether it was worth your amount of years reduced for you to give evidence? That was the sort of thing you would have to be weighing up in your mind, was it not, Mr. Nichols? No. It was not? No. You never thought, is it worth me giving evidence? The problem is, I was caught for possession of 10 kilos, which is a serious crime, but to be the witness I had to confess to all the other crimes, which are far more serious than possession of 10 kilos. So if I was weighing up the reduction, I might as well have stuck with possession of 10 kilos and said nothing. Mr. Nichols, you have been through, and indeed you have been through them, with my learned friend representing Mr. Steele, your various interviews, have you not? Yes, I have. Have you got a picture in your mind, please, of the totality of the situation that is beginning in these interviews, say interview 4, talking about the murders, and what happens at the time we get to interview 14? Have you got a picture in your mind of what happens to your evidence as we move along these interviews? I don't understand what you're saying. If you do not understand, I understand that you do not understand, and let us look at it like this. I shall try to do as shortly as possible. We start off on the day of the 6th with a battery at Ron Parkinson's. Starts off in interview 4, page 10. Is this a battery and it ends up being a light bulb? Do you remember this? I'm lost. Page what? Page 10, interview 4. Have you got in front of you, Mr. Nichols, interview 4? Yes, I have. Page 10, we see reference to a battery. In the middle, quote, I was buying a battery before Mick turned up, end quote. You bought this battery, is that correct? It also goes on to state that you put it in your car. You do not know what you were driving, and that is the battery. Now let's be clear here, the battery by interview 7, which is still very much a battery. Because if you look at interview 7, page 28 and 29, 28, although you start off at page 28 towards the bottom by saying, quote, I looked inside, but I think I bought a battery. I bought a battery from a long time ago, but I definitely bought a battery. I'm sure I bought it there. DC Brown then replies to you, okay. So going back to that, and then you decided to put it in the van. I think as I was sort of going back to the van, Mick pulled up and sort of beeped his horn. I had to sort of say to him, quote, hang on a minute, I'm putting the battery in. Because they keep it upright for an hour and a half before you use it. Then DC Brown says to you, quote, if that obviously was the case, then you'd go back over and get into his motor. So would you agree, Mr. Nichols, that in interview 4 and interview 7, it is definitely a battery which was purchased? That's quite true. It was, yeah. And quite sure that Mr. Steele turned up and you said to him, hang on a minute, I've got to put this battery upright. It's got to stay upright. Yes. When we get to interview 14 sometime later, page 13, this battery has been put in the back of the car. But hang on a minute, this battery has now been turned into a light bulb. What caused you, Mr. Nichols, to have to think about it? If we look at page 13, you don't know whether this is a battery or a light bulb that you've purchased. I was continuously thinking about it, trying to think of other things to help. What caused you to be thinking about this battery if you were so sure you were putting it in the back of your car when Steele turned up? As you said, hang on a minute, I've got to put this in the back, upright. What caused you then to think about it later on? Well, the fact that I told them to check. I told them if they could find the battery. I always take the receipt to the battery, so if they could find the battery or go to the shop to find out. I was trying to be helpful because, like I said before, the shop is never open when we meet there. And so the few times I've met there, I've generally bought something. So I'm sure in my mind it was a battery. So if you are sure in your mind that it was a battery that you are telling us in page 28 and 29 of interview 7, that you were literally putting the battery in when Steele turns up, were you not? I'm not sure, sorry. How come you had been thinking about it subsequently and lo and behold the battery now turns into a potential light bulb? That is what I'm saying, Mr. Nichols. Well, because I could never actually remember which vehicle I was in. I was always unsure which one it was. Anyway, here we have got to the light bulb. It is for aerial 3, is that right? Yes. You have bought some light bulbs, correct? Yes. Soon that day you went to Parkinson's. You bought some light bulbs for your aerial 3. Yes. And what did you do with them? Did you put them in your aerial 3? No, I didn't. The real light bulb to the aerial 3 was actually the same fitting as a rear Land Rover light on the number plate light. It was like the same fitting. So before I took my Land Rover for an MOT, I took it back out of it, if I ever put it in it, and I put it in my Land Rover. Oh, come on now, Mr. Nichols. This is all untrue, surely. Well, I know I didn't buy a battery then, but I did buy a battery when I met Mick on one occasion. Was there another occasion when you said, quote, hang on Mick, I'm putting a battery in before I go fishing, or something to that nature? No. Anyway, Mr. Nichols, there we are, interview 7. You are driving a van. By interview 14, that van has now become a convertible, has it not? Yeah, I believe so. I believe you, yeah. Look at pages 13 and 14. This van has been put down here originally, and it is now turned into a convertible. We can see you have already got the light on page 13, interview 14. And lo and behold, over the top of page 14, quote, I have also had a thought of what car I was driving that night as well. Do you want me to tell you what I thought I was driving? Ever willing, Mr. Brown said to you, yeah. You replied, I was driving a Golf convertible. Do you see that, Mr. Nichols? Yes, I do. What had caused you to have this amazing revelation? I remembered that I'd had an argument with my wife about the car because I'd come home from work in the car and she said she wanted to go out. And so I remembered that I went down and got the Golf out of the garage. Are you sure about that? Quite sure. Just look at interview 7 if you are so sure about that. Page 29, just look right at the bottom of the page. This is the police officer Brown asking you, quote, right, Darren, you cast your mind back and think what you were wearing. When we look over the page, obviously focusing on what you were wearing, you stated, quote, well, what I was wearing? Absolutely no hope. These are new boots. I'm usually wearing boots. I'm thinking it was a pair of boots that I'd have been wearing. Yeah, because I didn't change or anything when I got in from work. In plain English, Mr. Nichols, what does that mean? I'm not certain. Wearing me boots? In plain English, Mr. Nichols. Well, reading that confuses me as well. In plain English, what does I go straight from work mean? It means I got home and I went straight out again. Your English, Mr. Nichols, must be different from mine. If I may suggest, look at the sense of the sentence. You are saying, are you not, when asked what you are wearing? You are saying you are wearing boots because this day of the murder, the night of the murder, in fact, because you came home straight from work. In other words, you are wearing boots because you did not go home and change. That is what you are saying, is it not? No. If I'd gone and changed, I'd still be wearing the boots. The only difference is they would have been clean tracksuit bottoms and a t-shirt. I can see what you're saying, but I went home and I didn't get changed. Quote, yeah, because I didn't change my clothes or nothing like that. I went straight from work, did not go home at all. You went straight to Ron Parkinson's from work. You are wearing what you wore at work. That is what you are saying here, Mr. Nichols, is it not? That's what it appears to be, yeah. Not what it appears to be, that is what it says, I suggest. Like I say, that's what it appears to say, but I know I went home, but I didn't get changed. And your problem, Mr. Nichols, is this, that the police officers were asking you a question on page 29, which was not to do with your movements, but was to do with what you were wearing. And you got your story right or wrong, Mr. Nichols? No, I was just trying to recall from what I was wearing. Because on that day, did you go home? Yes, I did. Or did you go from work somewhere straight with your boots to Rettendon? As I said, I went home. I didn't get changed. If I'd have got changed, I'd probably be still wearing the same sort of clothes, roughly, just cleaner. Straight from work, Mr. Nichols, what does that mean? In this statement, I don't know, because I know I went home. Let us now move on to Mr. Womes. What Mr. Womes did or did not do was a subject of change in your evidence, was it not, Mr. Nichols? I don't recall. Let us look at it very quickly. Interview 4, page 12. Do you see at page 12 at the top, Mr. Nichols, quote, well, anyway, I'm talking to Mick in his Hilux. Jack has come along. You are being asked at the bottom of the page, 11, where did you see Jack? Quote, anyway, when I'm talking to Mick in his Hilux, Jack has come along. DC Winston then says, quote, that's at Mark's Tay. You reply, yeah, he hasn't stopped or got out or nothing. He said, right, we'll go now. Yeah, that's right. Do you see those words, yeah, he hasn't stopped or got out or nothing? Do you see those words, Mr. Nichols? Yes. Were those words true? At the time I thought Jack never got out, but I don't know why I said he hadn't stopped or, you know, why would he be with us? I mean, we'd have to be moving if he was with us. He hasn't stopped or got out or nothing, right? Plain as day, really. Fine, yeah. Happy with that, Mr. Nichols? Yes. Interview 7, things move on a bit, because look at page 32. Again, you are being asked about what happened when Mr. Womes turned up at Ron Parkinson's. Towards the top, DC Brian Winston says, or just about to leave Ron Parkinson's, what is the text of the conversation? And you say, quote, well, Jack pulls up and he says, Jack's there, right, we'll get going. And he's had a word with Jack, and I don't know, I can't. It goes on. So whereas before Jack had done nothing, said nothing, and had not stopped, now Mr. Steele is having a word with him, is that correct? Yes. To this jury you say this about Mr. Womes, quote, he arrived, pulled up beside us. He did come to the window of Mr. Steele's Hilux and had some conversation, end quote. That is what you told this jury, quote, he arrived, he pulled up beside us, and he did come to the window of Mr. Steele's. Let's just refresh our memory, Mr. Nichols. Now, what we're talking about here is the night of the murders themselves, December the 6th, 1995, where you are with Michael Steele and Jack Womes approaches. Now, let's go back to your police interview here, where it says, quote, I have to keep stopping on this, Darren. I don't want to disturb your train of thought. He did speak to Womes, is that correct? Where you reply, yeah, what I'm saying is I don't remember if he got out and spoke to Jack, or Jack got out and said something to him. But I know that they did speak. DC Brown then says to you, quote, they did have a conversation. Just look back at interview 4, page 12. You then reply, yeah, but he hasn't stopped or got out or anything. It is a bit different from having a conversation, is it not? Do you agree, Mr. Nichols? Yeah, but the next bit still says he's behind us. I agree he is behind, Mr. Nichols, but I'm talking about the conversation. Quote, he hasn't stopped, got out, or nothing. If he does not stop, he cannot have a conversation, can he? Yeah, no. All I'm trying to say is that he must have stopped because we were stopped, because how could he be behind us? I'm talking about the conversation, Mr. Nichols. Sorry. Do you mind focusing on the point? Yes. In interview 4, do you suggest he had a conversation, Mr. Nichols? No, I didn't recall a conversation at the time. To this jury, quote, he pulled up beside us. He did come to the window of Mr. Steele's Hilux and had some conversation, end quote. Yes, behind, not beside, behind. Behind. So he had got out of his car, Mr. Nichols? Yes. He got out and came to Mr. Steele's Hilux. He got out of the car and had a conversation. Yes. Now, in interview 4, Mr. Nichols, he has not even stopped, has he? Please look at the passage. Yeah, I've seen the passage. Like I say, I recall after that, he did stop, and he did get out, and he did speak to him. On each occasion, and we will come to some more, not many, but on occasion, the case and the evidence gets worse for Mr. Womes. Do you follow what I mean by that? You do not? Probably, yeah. Probably. On each occasion, Mr. Womes is getting more involved as the interviews go on and the statements go on. Is that a fair assessment? Yeah, I can see what you're saying. Is that true? I can't recall. We will just see. This interview 4, you have seen a solicitor beforehand, had you not? You had interview 3, and you have seen Officer Barrington. You knew you were going to be giving information, is that correct? I hadn't seen the solicitor, no. I think I saw a solicitor for interview 5. I didn't think I saw a solicitor in interview 4. No, interview 5 is the first time I see a solicitor, not interview 4. That is not actually correct, Mr. Nichols, is it? Did you see a solicitor called Oddie? That was the one they supply with you when you were arrested. You have seen a duty solicitor, but you had seen a solicitor, had you not? Yeah, I'd seen a duty solicitor, yes. When you gave this interview 4, this was not the first time, was it, that you had to think a little about the events of the night on your version? It was not the first time by any manner or means. I don't understand, sorry. The first statement I made involved a murder, yeah. It was not the first time you had to think about these events, was it? No, I could have thought about them at any time between it happening and then. You told my learned friend Mr. Parkins that you had given a theory of these murders to the officer, is that right? Yes. And said from the 6th of December until your arrest on the 13th, you had in your mind you had to reconstruct what had gone on that evening. I don't understand what you're saying. You hadn't just been able to blank these events out of your mind, had you, Mr. Nichols? No, it wasn't easy to forget. You see, Mr. Nichols, the problem that we have here is that there's a great mistake on your account that you made in interview 4 at page 13. Let us just look at that for one moment. You anticipated it when Mr. Parkins was asking you regarding the halfway house incident with Jack Womes. You told this court, Jack had said after the halfway house, right, off you go, so I pulled out of the halfway house, and then Jack said, pull over here. You reply, why? He then said, I want to change the number plates on the car. You said, why? What's the matter? And he replied, no, I've got to change them. He had some sticky tape with him, but they wouldn't stick. It was wet. You then replied, it won't stick, silly. Do you remember saying this, Mr. Nichols? Yes. You do remember this, Mr. Nichols. You recall that Jack said all of this to you after the halfway house. That is what the interview says, does it not? Yes. And it says so descriptively, does it not? It just says it how I'd say it, yeah. It says it descriptively in the same way it says, quote, then Jack says, pull over. I said, why? He said, I want to change the plates, etc., etc. So it is quite detailed, is it not? I suppose so. But it is all wrong, Mr. Nichols. Yeah, it is. Look, as I've said in another statement, I couldn't recall how I got to be in the Passat until a later date. But this all makes it sound descriptive, accurate, true, does it not, Mr. Nichols? But at the time, I was giving it to the best of my knowledge that I could recall. And it is all wrong, Mr. Nichols. We did change the plates, but not in the lay-by after the halfway house. It was before. How can you get that wrong, Mr. Nichols? When I'm giving the story, it's something I remembered about the number plates, so I said it when I remembered it. You remembered it after saying, quote, then Jack said, pull out of the halfway house. It's all in sequence, is it not? I remember that after we'd left the halfway house, I remember that I forgot that we changed the plates. So I said it. I wanted to give them as much information as possible. But this information on the face of it is easy to recall, is it not? It has detail, Mr. Nichols. It should be easy to recall, but I couldn't recall where and when. Do you remember saying to the magistrates, and we have the passage, quote, the trouble with telling a lying story is it's difficult to remember it? Yes, I do. Okay, Mr. Nichols, if I can draw your attention for one moment to interview 4. This deals with where you are parked. Page 14, a third from the bottom. You are describing, before this without any difficulty, the roundabout and lots of roads. DC Winston then says to you, quote, Rettendon Turnpike. Is that called the Rettendon Turnpike? And you, Mr. Nichols, reply, quote, it's called a turnpike. And then we took the Chelmsford Road. DC Brown then says to you, the A130, right? Is that correct? Yes. There's no problem there, Mr. Nichols, no? No. You say the A13, that's right. You took that road. Shall we just look in the exhibit bundle if you have got it? And the jury and my lord have in front of us. We have got a map here. It may be easiest to look at it, map 3 at page 3. So we can see the Rettendon Turnpike. Can you see it written down with that sort of roundabout with the A130 going down? Yes. Rettendon Turnpike, you are focused on that, is that right? Yes. Okay, Miss Nichols, now this officer points out to you that it is the A130, and you say that is right, that you took that road. Looking at page 14, interview 4, quote, it wasn't far up there really, no more than sort of a mile, at the bottom of the hill. That's where I dropped him off. I dropped him off on the left-hand side of the road, and he got out of the car. There is no problem with this, is there, Mr. Nichols? You have Mr. Worms being dropped off by you on the left-hand side of the road. That's correct, yeah. There's no problem here? No, that's right. And Mr. Worms had a bag with him. So he must have crossed the road with a bag and gone wherever he was going, is that correct? Yes. Okay, Mr. Nichols. Then it goes on to state that you received a telephone call from Mr. Worms, a 10 to 15 second phone call. You received this phone call. You have then turned into the lane for the first time, is that correct? Yeah, according to this. And when you have turned in, he is there, he gets in the car and tells you to spin it around, is that correct? According to this, yeah. According to this? Yes. Not a difficult description to give, is it, according to this? No. Interview 8, can you confirm at page 20 when asked a question about the police officer? Do you have that in front of you? Yes, I do. Page 20, interview 8, you are asked how long the telephone call is. And you say, quote, I mean, 10 to 15 seconds perhaps. Of course, that was the phone call which in interview 4 there had been a conversation, had there not? Because if we look back at page 16 in interview 4, there most certainly was a conversation. Quote, Darren, come and pick us up. To which you reply, that was quick. Yeah, that's right. Okay, Miss Nichols, now if we look at this interview here, you are going through the route and you get to the point where you had gone down the A130 to the turnpike and you are describing going up through Rettendon village and down the other side. It is there that Jack tells you to pull into the lane on the right-hand side. You actually turn into that lane. Quote, I turned in. You said you turned into the lane, Mr. Nichols. If we just go on again to page 18, just to repeat it, quote, I remember him saying, you come back down here, you reverse down here, like you reverse out facing the right way. He said, quote, save mucking about next time. Then at page 20, the phone call lasts for 10 to 15 seconds. Now this is a version in which you are agreeing with a police suggestion that you turned into the lane when you arrived, is that right? So Mr. Nichols, you agree here that Jack told you to pull into the lane, and you actually turned into that lane. Had you ever said that before, Mr. Nichols? I don't know. Because look at page 12, this is you speaking. You described the A130 towards Chelmsford. You described a little towny bit. Only for like 100 yards, a little shop and things. And then it goes back down the hill and around there. That was where I dropped him off. there was a lane on the right. He wanted me to drop him there, in the lane on the right. Is that correct, Mr. Nichols? Yes. You were not saying there that you dropped him in that lane? Just so we've got this right in our mind, Mr. Nichols, before you reply, you actually stated, so I stopped there and he got out, and he said, right, sod off. Mr. Nichols, that means, does it not, that you stopped on the side of the road, the lane being on the right. Quote, I stopped there, he got out and said, right, sod off. Is that not correct? No, I'm not sure what you want, what you're trying to get me to agree to or disagree with. I'm sorry. I am asking you, please, is it not what you are saying here exactly the same as what you were saying in the 4th interview? No. What do you mean by the word there, which is the last but one word in the text on page 12, and the 4th word on page 13? That is really the question Mr. Lederman is putting to you here. Like I said, there was a lane on the right, and he wanted me to stop there. So he wanted me to stop at the lane on the right. I'm sorry, Mr. Nichols? It says, I'm only going by what I said, but I know I went into the lane on the right. It says, quote, there was a lane on the right and he wanted me to drop him off there. In the next line it says, quote, so I stopped there. I am implying that I stopped at the lane. At the junction where the lane is, not in the lane. At the lane, in the lanes. Sorry, that's what I mean. Are you saying that this is the same thing? In my book, yeah. So if we go back to interview 4, when you said at page 14, quote, I dropped him on the left-hand side of the road. What does that mean in English? That means I thought I dropped him on the left-hand side of the road. It does not mean I thought I dropped him on the left-hand side of the road, does it, Mr. Nichols? Well, when I gave that interview, I thought I dropped him on the left-hand side of the road. It does not say I thought. Sorry, when I gave that interview, I said that I dropped him on the left-hand side of the road. That in English means what? When I gave that interview, I said that I dropped him on the left-hand side of the road. That means what it says, that the car stopped in the road that the jury have a map of, on the left-hand side. He got out with the bag. That is what it means, does it not? Yes. Okay, Miss Nichols, now, quoting what you say here, so I stopped there and he got out, he said, right, sod off. Is that correct? Yeah, I'm referring to the lane in this interview. You are referring to the lane? Yes. What caused you to change your mind, Mr. Nichols? I had more time to think about it and I remembered more in detail what happened. You told me some minutes ago that you had difficulty in remembering that you went to the A130 and you stopped on the left. You had no difficulty in remembering that. I said at that time that's what I thought happened, yes. You had no difficulty is the word I'm asking you to agree with. Like I said, when I was given, that's what I believed in my mind happened, and that's what I was saying, and I had no difficulties in saying it. Did it occur to you that it was an absurd story to think that you could park a car on the left-hand side of a main road and a man get out with a pump-action shotgun and cross the road during traffic of that time of night, Mr. Nichols? No, I remembered what actually happened. But your memory was assisted, was it not, at page 14 by the police officer? Because it is a police officer who for the first time says, quote, Jack told you to pull into that lane. The police officer who has put that to you, and then you reply, quote, I turned in here. Do you agree with that or not? Well, all I can say is the policeman must have took from what I previously said, that I turned in. You help us, Mr. Nichols. Where had you previously said Jack told me to pull into the lane? Well, as Jack was directing me. Jack was directing me, and as I said in number 12, the bit where I said there was a lane on the right, and he wanted me to drop him off there, whatever it is. So I stopped there. I mean, Jack's directing me. So I'm only presuming Mr. Winston has took what I've said there. So when you say at page 12, Mr. Nichols, he wanted me to drop him there, that is the same as Jack telling you to pull into the lane? Yes. I see. What is different is this. What is different is at page 18. Can I ask what interview? Same interview, Mr. Nichols, because at page 18 you are saying and you are remembering Jack saying having got into the lane and effectively doing the 3-point turn. You can remember Jack saying, quote, when you come back, you reverse down there, like you reverse facing the right way. He said, save mucking about the next time. I thought, yeah, that's fair enough. So I drove up and I turned towards Chelmsford. Is that correct, Mr. Nichols? Yes. If you go back to interview 4 at page 16, do you have that in front of you? Yes, I do. Quote, so I turned into this lane and he said, turn your lights off, spin it around. So that's what I did. Are you saying that those two versions are the same? What do you mean? Do those two versions both make sense when put together? No. The first version is that he is there when you come back and tells you to turn around when you arrive back. Is that correct? Yes. The second version is before you leave on the first occasion. He is telling you, and you can remember it, to turn around when you come back. Is that correct? Reverse in when I come back, yeah. Those two versions cannot live with each other, can they? No. Could you explain then, Mr. Nichols, why one version which is quite definite is completely the opposite to another version which is also quite definite? All I can say is that the idea of having all the interviews was to try and jog my memory, to get information out of me. And during the interviews I remembered more clearly what happened and I gave the account as I remembered it. And at later interviews, like I say, I recall exactly what happened. The interviews were there to iron out any inconsistencies and to prevent you from being railroaded when you came to court. Do you remember that phrase being used? No, I don't. I always thought the interviews were to make me remember information to assist police. Now, the next interview I want you to take a look at, Mr. Nichols, concerns July the 5th. Could you get that in front of you, please? Yeah, I've got it, yeah. And although our copy of the custody record schedule ends in June, the 13th of June in fact, this went on for months and months and months of you being visited, did it not? All the time until I was put in prison, yeah. And on the 5th of July, these two officers, Oakley and Carter, were also investigating you, were they not? I don't know what they were investigating, but I thought it was to do with DC Jim. They were interviewing both of you and in really your connection with DC Jim. Okay, Mr. Nichols, now let's talk about these police interviews that you had with these officers over many months. They were making sure, were they not, that they got a final version from you which would not helpfully result in you getting railroaded when it went to court. That was what was happening, was it not? I don't exactly know what railroaded means, but no. No. But you were you ever given note paper, writing paper to make notes, Mr. Nichols? Yes, I was. And in what circumstances were you given those pieces of paper? Well, I'd asked for some paper and a pen. Why, Mr. Nichols? Because I spent a lot of time on my own and I kept remembering things and I didn't know if I'd told them, basically. I do not quite follow that, Mr. Nichols. Well, because I'd spent a lot of time on my own and I'd got confused, I couldn't remember if I'd told them things in the interview. And I'd remember something insignificant or whatever, so I'd just make a little note to myself to remind myself to say it when I was next seen by an officer. Did the police officers ever indicate to you something like this, Mr. Nichols? Quote, tomorrow we'll talk about the Rettendon murders, and then there will be an interview the following day. No. Did the police officers ever say on one of these visits to you that you were going to be interviewed the next day? Did they ever say, we'll have an interview tomorrow? I presume so. You see, a lot of these interviews, Mr. Nichols, go over the same ground, do they not? Yeah, they do. You see, after interview 4, did the police officer say to you, we'll come back and go over the detail at some later time? I can't recall. If they had, do you think you might have made some notes? No. I don't know when it was. I think I was taken to a different police station, but I was removed from that police station to another one. That's when I started making notes. To Rayleigh police station, were you not? Yeah, it was just before I left Rayleigh, or after I left there. that I asked for the paper because I was sort of thinking of things and then not sure if I'd have said them or anything. So I wanted to remind myself to say it, really. But I can't remember when, but it was after quite a few interviews. Just before you left Rayleigh Police Station? It's either before I left or after I went to the next one, because I moved from there to another one. You made a statement, Mr. Nichols, or statements I should say, on the 21st of May, a witness statement. Yes. Did you have any notes, Mr. Nichols, to help assist you when making this witness statement? No, I didn't. Before you made the statement, were you told that you would be making a statement? Yes, I was. And you were told, were you, that the witness statement meant that you would have to give evidence? I knew by then that I had to give evidence, yes. These notes were on what pieces of paper, Mr. Nichols? What, my own notes? Just plain pieces of A4. And the police gave you the A4, is that correct? Yes. And they gave you a writing table, did they not? Yeah, they gave me a desk. A desk? I mean, when you are in a cell, do you have any means of writing a letter? If I wanted to, yes. They'd give me, if I wanted it, or if I wanted to write a letter, they'd give me a paper and pen, yeah. And where would you write it? Sitting at the desk, probably. How much did you write, Mr. Nichols? Very little, only odd words. Just things that prompted me to remember things, really. On pieces of A4 paper? Yeah. And those pieces of A4 paper would have, is this right, the jottings and things that had suddenly come to your memory, is that correct? Yes. We can see here, Mr. Nichols, at number 67, on the 11th of June, you were provided with a table and a chair, as well as a filing cabinet, with police officers Winston and Crayling being present in your cell for 2 hours and 35 minutes. What did you do with these pieces of paper? Just threw them away afterwards. Did the police officers ever see you writing on these pieces of paper? No, I don't think so. Did any of these pieces of paper refer to conversations between you and Mr. Steele? I don't recall. They were very basic things. If I remembered something, I'd write a few words to remind myself. I don't recall if it was about conversations or anything like that. Would you not try to recollect things that were said? Yeah, I mean, I was trying to remember. Like I say, I used to dream about it every night, and I'd wake up and think of something, and I'd have to, you know, make a little note of it. Of what you said? No, of what I remembered. I wasn't sure if it had been said. Did that include conversations? I can't recall anything that I wrote down. Why not, Mr. Nichols? You cannot recall anything that you wrote down at all? No, I just wrote down, you know, things for me to remember to tell them. When you went into the interview, you had written down things which you considered might be of importance, had you not, Mr. Nichols? Yes. So naturally you would take those pieces of paper along to the interview room with you, would you not? Yeah, or I'd tell my solicitor. So when you were interviewed by these officers wishing to give information, you would naturally take with you the pieces of paper upon which this information was written, would you not? Yeah, I presume so. And presumably there must have been an occasion when you said to either D.C. Brown or D.C. Winston, "Look, I've just remembered this," and there would be a piece of paper with what you had written down. I don't recall if anything like that ever happened. Surely if you suddenly remembered something in the night or whatever and had written it down on a piece of paper, you would want to draw what you had written down to the attention of that police officer, would you not? Yes. And did you? Like I say, I'd normally tell my solicitor. I'm sure everything I wrote down got to the police, yeah, so they could ask me about it. The solicitor was not present when you were being interviewed later, was he? My solicitor was present at all the interviews apart from the first 2, 3 or 4. Did you give him the pieces of paper? No, I'd normally rip the paper up, but I normally discuss with my solicitor before an interview, you know, discuss certain things. Mr. Nichols, why rip up a piece of paper? which is there for the purpose of jogging your memory. What was so secret about it? Nothing. It's done its job. It's jogged my memory. If I can remember before I go into the interview room what it was that I wanted to say, then it's done its purpose, hasn't it? Did you ever begin an interview by saying, "Oh, I've remembered something"? I don't know. You are not hiding anything from us, are you, Mr. Nichols? No, I just can't remember if I started the interview with, "I remembered something." What you are saying in simple terms, as we understand it, is this. Things came to your memory which you wrote down, is that correct? Yes. Those things you believed were important. Just facts, you know, minor facts. I don't think I ever remembered anything important, but just little things. Did you remember that it was not a battery, but it was a light bulb? No. Are you saying, or are you not, that you brought to the notice of the police things that you had remembered? Yes. Did the police express interest in what you had brought to their notice? I'm sure that they would have done, I can't recall. In which case it would follow that it would come into the interview, would it not? Yes. So, Mr. Nichols, a police officer would say to you, "We believe that you have some new information," or "You have remembered something new," to which you would reply, "I've remembered this, that, or the other." That is roughly what would happen, is it not? I suppose so, yeah. This would all happen on tape, would it not? Yeah. Because what you are saying is that this all happened, are you, during the actual interviews on tape? All my interviews were on tape. Now, Mr. Nichols, you were visited up to and including roughly 36 hours of visits by DC Winston and DC Brown, who were drawn to the attention of your writings in your cell. Is that not correct? Yeah, I may have done. I don't recall. Why not, Mr. Nichols? There you are, being visited by them. There you have written something out and say, "Look, I've just remembered this," and showed them. Did that not happen? Like I say, I may have done, but I don't particularly recall. Can you remember writing anything specific down, Mr. Nichols? No, I only ever wrote a few things down anyway, just minor points that would come back to me, and I'd just think, right, I've got to remember that. And, you know, if it was about the car or something, I'd just write car just to remind me. I'd easily forgotten. I'd write things down and couldn't work out what I'd wrote down. You never had any piece of paper with you during the interview from which you read, is that correct? I don't think I ever had anything that I read, no. Sorry? I said I don't think I ever had anything that I read. You don't think? Like I say, I may have took one of the pieces in with me, but I don't recall it. Did you ever read from a piece of paper, Mr. Nichols? Only that thing they hand you at the beginning. No, I mean from a piece of paper that you had written what evidence had come to your mind, Mr. Nichols. No, I wouldn't write it like that anyway. I'd write like 2 or 3 words. I wouldn't write a story. Now, Mr. Nichols, I want you to transition back to the night of the murders themselves. Now, do you appreciate the difference between the conversation between you and Mr. Wombs? As you have said in interview 4, in connection with this call, the effect of the conversation being Jack telling you to come and get us, to which you replied that was quick. That conversation which you recall lasting around 10 to 15 seconds. And the conversation as you now recall it, come and get us, might have been replied with a simple okay. Do you remember these events, Mr. Nichols? Yeah. You appreciate the difference, do you not? Yes, I do. What is the difference, Mr. Nichols? Well, one would have taken longer to say than the other. What is significant about that, Mr. Nichols? Well, obviously, if it's a very short call, you couldn't have said too much in a short call. If it was a very long call, it could not last 4 seconds. That is the point, is it not, Mr. Nichols? Or vice versa, yeah. That is the point, is it not? Yes. That is why your evidence has changed from interview 4, when there was a conversation on your own admission that would last 10 to 15 seconds, and the version that we now have, which is come and get us. I might have said, okay. No. No? I've never known the length of it. It is just a coincidence, is it, that the conversation gets shorter and that fits in with the 1859 and the 4-second phone call? No, I never knew the duration of the call until I got to this court. No one has ever said to me, I was told there was a call made about 7 o'clock, but I've never been told the duration of the call or anything like that. I only worked it out since I've been here. You were never shown a schedule of any kind? No, I've been shown some phone call documentation, but it's never had call durations or anything on it. Okay, Mr. Nichols, can I draw your attention now, please, to the top of page 21. This is regarding what Michael Steele and Jack Williams were wearing that evening. And in your words, quote, they were wearing Wellington boots and overalls. Quote, I think it was just overalls and Wellington boots. I don't know if they had gloves on. I think I noticed that Jack had surgical gloves on, but I was driving the car and I couldn't see properly. But I do think that Jack had blood over him, like a fairish amount, if you know what I mean. Then further on you go to state, we are talking about speckles of blood. You reply, yeah, they had speckles of blood on them. I couldn't really look, but I sort of glanced. He was wearing gloves. Was he wearing gloves, Mr. Nichols? Yes. It wasn't until we were about half a mile up the road that I realised that they'd shot them. So what you're saying there, first of all, Mr. Nichols, is, I don't know if they had gloves on. Although you say, quote, I think I noticed Jack had surgicals on. Is that correct? You are also saying, quote, I did not get a good look in the car because I was driving. Is that right, Mr. Nichols? Yes. Okay, Mr. Nichols. Now, how would you describe that summary to my lord and this jury? I recall that I did remember seeing gloves and that they had speckles of blood or something on them that I know to be blood. I am asking you to describe what you are saying here, Mr. Nichols. Sorry, I thought you were asking me something else. No, I'm asking you, Mr. Nichols. I'm glad that you can see the difference, to see what you were describing here. What is the effect? Here I'm saying I wasn't sure if they had gloves on. Exactly. You were also saying, were you not, because you were driving, you say, quote, I didn't get to look in the car because I was only driving it. That was one of your reasons for saying you were not at all sure, is that correct? Yes. That is what you are saying here, Mr. Nichols? Yes. Is that a fair summary of what's said there? Yes. You are doubtful here? Yeah, I couldn't recall properly. Okay, Mr. Nichols, now if I can draw your attention to interview 8 at the page 24 at the top there, quote, and then Jack, I'm sure it was Jack, sitting in the middle between the seats behind us. He had rubber gloves on, and I do remember the rubber gloves. They had specks of blood on them. I then see Mick handing him parts of the gun. Then the police officer says to you, quote, right, trying to keep things in order that they occurred, please, Mr. Nichols. You then reply, quote, well, I'm sure I see his gloves. So there you are saying, quote, I'm sure I see his gloves. And you are saying, quote, I see Jack sitting in the middle between the seats behind us, and he had rubber gloves on. Quite different from interview 4, is it not? Page 21. Yes. Back to page 21, quote, I don't know if they had gloves on. I think I noticed Jack had surgicals on. Yeah, I think he had surgicals on because I didn't get to look in the car. It is the difference between chalk and cheese, is it not, Mr. Nichols? Not really. Is it not? As I said, I didn't recall if he had gloves on, but then I later recalled that he did have gloves on. When you gave the version in interview 4, what was the difference in terms of your memory when you were saying, I couldn't see him in the car? Interview 4 was the first time I'd been asked to recall the route to the murder, the route, and I was doing the best I could. Every time things just get better and better for the police, do they not, Mr. Nichols? Things come back to you after the first time. And what, Mr. Nichols, you actually wake up one morning, do you, and say, yes, I can remember seeing Jack sitting in the back seat with these surgical gloves on with specks of blood on them? And what, write it down on a piece of paper? No, the first time I gave the account, I gave it to the best I could remember. I mean, it was not an easy thing to do anyway, and I was trying to get it out as quick as I could. And I knew I made a lot of mistakes, and I knew there were a lot of things I couldn't remember. One thing you do know, however, Mr. Nichols, is the road, do you not? You know this road like the back of your hand. You see, I've travelled down the road, yeah. I don't live near it. I've never drove down it to work. I don't know it like the back of my hand. I know it goes from Chelmsford to the A127. You went to that swimming pool as a child, did you not, Mr. Nichols? No, it's a swimming pool centre. Did you go to the swimming pool centre as a child? No, I've never been to it. I've just driven past it. When you were a child? When I was a little child, yeah. And that was a long time ago. Quite a while ago, yeah. You see, Miss Nichols, because when we look at page 16 of interview 4, this passage which Mr. Parkins has drawn your attention to, he said go right, meaning the A130 towards Chelmsford, not back to the Rettendon Turnpike. Now, this is a conversation that you are giving, is it not? Yes. And it is a conversation in which you are being told to turn right, not left, to the Rettendon Turnpike. Yes. And you could recall that conversation, could you not? Yeah. What I could recall was the fact that I know we went to the Aurora swimming pool centre, and in my mind, I was telling myself it's a right turn out of that junction. Mr. Nichols, you are an intelligent man, are you not? Sorry? You are an intelligent man, are you not? In what respect? I don't think I'm particularly clever. Don't you? Not really. Mr. Nichols, please understand the question that I have asked, which was the conversation. The conversation was, quote, turn right, not back to the Rettendon Turnpike. It is the conversation, not where physically you thought you were, Mr. Nichols. Do you understand the point that I am making to you? Yes. What is it? The conversation, not the actual fact that I went the wrong way. And this is the conversation that you remembered, Mr. Nichols. In my mind at the time, yeah. A specific conversation which described turning right, not turning left. You see, that is part of the conversation, is it not? Yeah, I do remember that. And there is no reason why you could not remember that conversation, is there? No, like I say, I had it in my mind that the swimming pool centre was, you know, turn right. I'm not talking about what was in your mind. I'm talking about this conversation. Okay, yeah, I agree. So it makes no sense for you to say that you were so disorientated, so lost, that you actually thought that you were south of Rettendon. I knew where I was. You did? Yes. If you knew where you were, Mr. Nichols, how could you have said this in the light of what you say now? Well, as I've said all along, I mean, on the next page it tells you that I went to where I went to. So I may have been confused about going left or right, but I was going to the right place in my mind. Your explanation to Mr. Parkins was that you were disorientated. So you thought that you had to turn right because you were in fact south of Rayleigh. Yeah, that's right. But you just told this court, Mr. Nichols, that you knew where you were going. No, I did know where I was. But like I said, you thought... Like I said to you, I thought that the way that we were going was right. The problem you have, Mr. Nichols, is that you have been making these events up as you go along. And you have been caught out. No, not at all. So when it comes to interview 4, the van then becomes a car. What happens here? That's something I changed because I recall the right thing. The battery you got wrong as well? That's something that is proven to be wrong, yes. The changeover at the halfway house after the halfway house was wrong also? That's something I couldn't recall. Parking on the left-hand side of the road was wrong? Again, something I recall different at a later date. Mr. Worms present when you arrived back and told you to spin the car around wrong? Okay. Okay, Mr. Nichols? Yes. Doesn't matter, does it, that all of this information is incorrect? Yeah, but I did correct all of these things at a later date. You certainly corrected them, Mr. Nichols. Well, I could have left them, couldn't I, as they stood, but I didn't. I corrected them to get them right. No gloves seen in interview 4? For definite no man seen in the back seat? Sorry? No gloves specifically or definitely seen by a man sitting in the back seat in interview 4, Mr. Nichols? I wasn't sure, yeah. And a mistake about turning right in interview 4? Yes, but I did, after making the mistake of going the wrong way. I was going the right way. I suggest that the police officers corrected this version, Mr. Nichols. So there's all of these mistakes in interview 4. Is that correct? Yes. And they are the result of a simple bad memory. When I gave interview 4, it would have been a time that had elapsed since the event. and I was under a lot of pressure giving the interview, and I gave the interview at the time as I remembered it. So it was the pressure to cause you to say you parked on the left-hand side? No, just lack of memory. When you were being asked questions in the magistrate's court by Mr. Everington, I think you were asked a question in cross-examination. Can I hand to my lord and the jury what you were saying? It says here, Mr. Nichols, quote, "In the interview, I was told to be honest, and I tried to get around it, but I couldn't." Was this just for interview 4? Is this the only interview in which you lied? I think so. You think so? What did you mean when you said, "I initially thought I couldn't trust them and that I would be hanging myself"? Well, in interview 3, I thought, well, if I confess to all the things I've done wrong, and it's, you know, a good enough conviction for my own, like, confession, as it were, I was very wary of telling them what I'd done wrong. You mean by that you would be confessing to crimes for which inevitably you would be sentenced to a long term of imprisonment, is that correct? Yes, that's correct. Could you look, please, at the telephone schedule we have in bundle 4A, please? Do you have page 71? Yes. You do know, do you not, that Mr. Steele had not left any message on your answering machine? No. You do not know that? What day? What time? On an answering machine which you dialed, or might have dialed on the 6th of December 1995. You know it, do you not? No, I know that, like, I was definitely told to meet him, so I don't know that wasn't the message from him, no. Look at interview 7, page 16. Have you got it? Page 16. We are looking at page 15 at the bottom here, and we can see that the police have your itemised bill. Is that correct? Yes. Do you agree that they had this information? Yeah, I'll agree that they did have it at some point, yeah. If you look at page 17, not only did they have the itemised bill, but they highlighted in yellow. We can see it just past the middle of the page here. They highlighted in yellow your calls. Do you remember this? Yeah, I do. Okay, Mr. Nichols. Now, they were asking you, do you remember, it is in this interview here, how it came about that you were ringing Mr. Steele? You can see it at page 16, can you not? Why would you be phoning him? And to which you replied, quote, "Because he had rung, I imagine. I mean, he has rung me, and all I can say is that he's left an answering machine message." To which DC Winston replies, "Well, if he has, it's not shown here." Mr. Nichols, answering machine messages can be retrieved. Did you know that the authorities and the police can get those messages from the bank in which they are sworn? No, I didn't know that. I put it to you that they can, and there is no message by Mr. Steele asking you to ring him. I'll have to take your word for it. I haven't got a clue. I didn't know they recorded the messages. Okay, so I'm just actually going to cut in here because there's a lot of legal discussion which I'm not actually going to read out because it will probably confuse the story, really. But just to give you a gist of what they're trying to say, basically what they're trying to say when you read this is that the answer phone messages are deleted after a certain amount of time. And bearing in mind, Darren Nichols wasn't arrested until the 13th. They believe that the answer phone message may have been lost. Now, the points that they wish to make, and I'm just going to read out exactly what it says in front of me here. It says, the points that, if I may say so, we are focusing on, and the police were focusing on, was who phoned who first that day. And it appears on the face of it that the first actual phone calls are Nichols ringing Steele at 12:51. Now, the first phone call out that day by Darren Nichols is actually at 10:20, where he calls his voicemail. But by all accounts, there was no voicemails retrieved. Now, whether that's because such a long amount of time had elapsed between the actual murders and them catching up with Darren Nichols and arresting him with the cannabis in the car, it's quite impossible to actually say. But Darren Nichols' first call out on his mobile phone on the 6th of December was at 10:20 in the morning to his voicemail. But the first call between the people who were involved in this murder is from Darren Nichols at 12:51 to Michael Steele. There isn't any proof or evidence that Michael Steele was the first person to reach out to Darren Nichols on the day of the murder. Okay, and just a little bit further down the page here from Mr. Monday QC, he states, "My lord, the admission that I'm prepared to make is that between the hours of 7:20 p.m. in the evening of December the 5th and 10:20 a.m. in the morning on the 6th of December, Nichols' mobile telephone did not receive any call that went to his voicemail service. Therefore, the point that Mr. Lederman wants to make, that there is no message left between those hours, is accurate." So Darren Nichols may have got up, he may have called his voicemail at 10:20, but there's no phone call to his mobile phone from Michael Steele between the hours of 7:20 p.m. the evening of the 5th and 10:20 a.m. the morning of the 6th. Hopefully that's cleared that up, and I will now continue from where I left off. Members of the jury, you will get copies of that eventually, but effectively it means what I said earlier. No messages on the Nichols answer machine service between 7:20 p.m. on the 5th approximately and midday 12:51 on the 6th. The cross-examination can continue. Just dealing with the 5th the day before. Look at page 14, interview 7. There is no question, as we can see when we look at this answer. Quote, "Did you have any inkling before that day when you got the phone call?" You reply, "No, he actually rung me on that day at some point. I mean, I was at work, or I'm not sure, I may have been in a pub, but he did ring me on that actual day and say that can you meet me later?" So there is no question on the 5th of there being a telephone call about meeting at Mark's Tate on the 6th, was there? No. No. As you understand it, on the 6th there would be a record. If Mr. Steele had phoned your mobile, there would be a record of his call. The fact of the call being logged in your answering machine. Do you follow? Yes, I do. And that means, Mr. Nichols, that the first person who made a call on the 6th between you and Mr. Steele was at 12:51. Have you got the document, please, at page 71? Yes, I have. And the fact that at 10:20 you dialed your messages is correct. Okay, Mr. Nichols, now regarding the events after you finished work on December the 6th, 1995, you stated that you wanted to have a couple of pints at the Cock at Rain, is that correct? Yes. It had been a long day? Yes. And to suddenly meet Mr. Steele out of the blue, is that how it went down? Yes. No explanation given? No, that's right. You meeting at Ron Parkinson's at around 5 o'clock was not something you would be particularly enthusiastic about, is it? That's correct, yeah. Did you express your lack of enthusiasm to Mr. Steele? Probably. Well, there must have been a conversation, mustn't there? I expect so, yeah. I just can't recall. What I am getting at is there must have been a conversation that took some time, Mr. Nichols. I suppose so. I remember being, peed off about it, but I mean, I said to him, I didn't know if I could make it on time, basically. You said I didn't know if I could make it on time. Did you ask him why he wanted to see you at 5 o'clock at Ron Parkinson's garage? No, all the other times we'd met at Ron Parkinson's were drug-related reasons. I see, Miss Nichols. Now, there you were with your friends, you say, quote, "I don't know if I can make it." What did he reply to that? Better make it? I'd like you to make it if possible? What exactly did Mr. Steele say to you? All I'm saying is I didn't know if I could make it because of where I was, basically. And what did he say? I can't recall. But I know I was going to try and make it, I was going to try and get there. Was it left in limbo that if you could make it, so well and good? If you could not make it, then that's too bad, maybe another day. No, it was left that I would make it, but at what time and I would just get there as quick as I could, basically. So you left it in the air, did you, as to when you would be able to make it? I believe so. How much in the air is it left? Like I was saying at the time, I knew that obviously where I was and getting back to meet him was going to be difficult because I'd already made promises of other things, and I told him that. You had, if you like, a cause of time which was how long you were going to spend drinking at the Cock of Rain. Well, even down to the motorway traffic would have been difficult. No, what I say is that you could, I suppose, have said, look, someone has to see me at 5 o'clock. I think we had better cut out the drinking at the pub. Well, yeah, I could have done. And did you? No. When we get to Mr. Nichols, to your account, because we have got to the scene and we have been through your interviews about what happened at the scene both before and after the murders. But when you got to the scene, in terms of the calls that you say of being told to go off, you say that you went to the wheat sheaf and realised that you had got a poor signal. Is that correct? Yes. Well, you must have been a little nervous, were you, about that? In what respect? Well, this operation, as you have described it, it is an operation on a dark, snowy night involving a lane, is that right? Yes. It was an operation which involved Mr. Tate? Yes. An operation which you believe had something to do with showing Tate where a drug deal was going to be taking place, or may be taking place, is that correct? Yes. And you had also seen Mr. Wombs change the number plates? Yes. So all this was quite, how can I put it, quite tense, was it not? Well, I didn't really think about it. You did not think about it. Is it often that you are asked to sort of drive a car with a false plate and someone shows you a lane and tells you to spin it around when you come back on a dark December evening? No, it isn't very often at all. Does it happen? No, it's never happened to me before or since. It is somewhat extraordinary thing to be doing, is it not? At the time I didn't think so. When Mr. Wombs told you to go away, whichever the phrase you say was used, he said he would ring you to get him to pick him back up. Did you think, well, he obviously wants me and the car out of the way? Well, yes, out of sight. You must have thought that you were being something similar to a getaway driver, did you not? I may have done. Well, did you? I didn't really, I just thought he wanted me out of the way. How many times did he want you out of the way, and at the same time, a matter of minutes before, try to put a plastic false number plate on one of the cars? No, it's never happened before. It was a bit odd, was it not? I suppose so, but they never stuck. Pardon? They never stuck anywhere, I didn't really think about it. You did not think about it? Well, I was asked to do it, and I did it. You were driving down a road and Mr. Wombs suddenly says pull into the side on the rainy, snowy night. He tries to stick some plastic number plates onto the front and back of the car in a lay-by on a snowy December night. You did not think this was a bit odd? We had never changed the number plates before, I admit that. Whether he succumbed or succeeded, I should say, or not, what was going through your mind when he was attempting to do this? I don't recall, to be honest. You do not recall? I thought it was unusual. We've never changed number plates before. Unusual? How about illegal? I know it's illegal, yeah. Did you wonder why on December the 6th, sometime after 5 o'clock, Mr. Wombs was wishing to change the number plates of the Passat? Well, because if the car was spotted and someone took the number plate, they would be taking the wrong number plate down, wouldn't they? Spotted doing what exactly, Mr. Nichols? A drugs deal, as far as I was concerned, to do with drugs. Mr. Nichols, this is quite a heavy scene, was it not? A drug deal, cars should have false plates, no? Well, like I said, it's the first time the first time I've ever changed plates on anything. I didn't really give it any thought. Drugs is drugs. There you go, you were told to go somewhere, and he will ring you, you park up, you say at the wheat sheaf, did you say something like this? My goodness gracious me, I can't get a good signal. No, I don't speak like that. You might have used other words. Well, yeah, I noticed I didn't have a signal. Because you must have thought perhaps he has been trying to ring me, potentially. I don't really recollect what I thought, but I just thought I'd get a better place for a signal. It was it not, something of a tense operation, was it not? No, I just thought I'd move up the road, up the hill, because I knew I'd get a better signal on the hill. What I am asking you, Mr. Nichols, is something you could not remember before. In that situation, waiting for Mr. Wombs to ring you, did you think in the circumstances that existed, that was the right moment for you to dial your answer machine to see if you had a message? Well, if I had a message to receive and I dialed it, you see my phone, Well, if I'm taking a call or making a call and someone else tries to contact me, it actually beeps and says you've got a call waiting. And all you've got to do is just shut the flap and open it again, and you can talk to that person. Are you saying you cannot receive a call if there are messages currently on your answer machine, Mr. Nichols? No. What I'm saying is that I can receive 2 simultaneous calls. I can be making a call, and if someone rings me whilst I'm making a call, it won't come up engaged. It will ring in their earpiece, and it will beep in my phone and say that I've got a call waiting. And you have the option to hang up and speak. You know, all you do is you shut the flap, open the flap, that cuts one call off and puts the other one on. You are saying there you were waiting for a call from Mr. Worms in the circumstances that we have been through, and you did not think it was at all odd that you might at the same time be hearing your messages? No, like I said, my phone, if I was hearing my messages, a phone call could come through, my phone would make a noise in the earpiece, and I would stop what I was doing and take the phone call. Now, Mr. Nichols, let me suggest to you that if this is your evidence that you received a phone call by that public house, the Wheat Sheaf, a poor signal, I just want to clarify that this is your evidence, is it not? Yeah, that's why I moved. There was nothing wrong with your phone, was there? Not particularly, no. You managed to get messages on other occasions during that day? Yes. We suggest that if you were parked by the Wheat Sheaf, there is no reason with your orange phone why you should not have received a proper good signal. Well, I know I didn't. I mean, I didn't get a good signal. I mean, I don't know. I owned an orange phone. It was a phone that you could stand in one place and move 2 feet and the signal completely changed. We further suggest that although there may have been an attempt by Mr. Worms to phone you at 1859, in fact, Mr. Nichols, and you know this, you never received a call from him, did you? I did. Did you receive 1 or 2 calls? 1 call. Did your phone ring once or twice? Only the once. Only the once. Yeah. Now, changing the subject for one moment, Mr. Nichols. Back in 1995, you used to sell quite a lot of second-hand cars, is that correct? You were, in essence, a second-hand car salesman to some degree. Yeah, that's right. Now, back to the Passat that you supposedly sold to Mr. Steele, the Passat that you were supposedly driving on the evening of those murders. When did you say that you actually sold this Passat to Mr. Steele? Before the 6th. Well, of course, that, Mr. Nichols, that's quite obvious. But could you be a bit more specific on the date that you actually sold this car to Mr. Steele? Well, he was working at the house because I'd put it in that address, you know, at that address. It was taken to that address. Which house are you talking about, Mr. Nichols? Meadow Cottage, the new house that he was doing up. You said to us, to my lord and this jury, when you were giving evidence, when Mr. Mundy was asking you questions, you said you sold it to Michael Steele in November or thereabouts. Is that true? Yes. Well, when is it? November or thereabouts? As I said, he was working at the property at Meadow Cottage because that's where the car was taken to. So it'd be a few weeks before the 6th. A few weeks before the 6th, is that correct? About that, yeah. Was there ever any record of this transaction, Mr. Nichols? No. You see, as a part-time second-hand car dealer, did you keep any books? No. Did you pay any tax on any of it? I paid tax. On these cars, Mr. Nichols? No. Did you ever send any logbook off to Swansea with the date of sale of the car? I might have done once or twice. You see, it was not just that you sold this car. You were buying and selling vehicles, were you not? As you agreed with me, a part-time car dealer, second-hand car dealer. Yes, I did. Did you bother to keep any record at all of these vehicles? No. You sound, Mr. Nichols, if I may say so, as though I am asking rather a ridiculous question when I ask you to keep records. Is that right? Well, I never kept any records, so no, you're asking a question. I've never kept any records, that's the answer. Did you always get paid the full amount when you sold these cars? Or was it sometimes part payment, part of the deal? I've sold cars to relatives who've got no money, who would sort of give me £20 or £30 a week to pay for it, yeah. Did you keep any record of who owed you money for these vehicles? Not particularly. I normally try to remember. Mr. Nichols, had you lent this Passat to a Mr. French? No. No, so Mr. French had not had the Passat up until shortly before Christmas? No. Had the Passat ever come into the possession of Mr. Bridge? He may have drove it once or twice, but not particularly, no. Mr. Nichols, you have had knowledge of the fact, have you not, that Mr. Worms has a trailer? What sort of trailer, sorry? A trailer on which vehicles that have broken down can be placed. No, I didn't. You know perfectly well, Mr. Nichols, that the Passat was never sold to Mr. Steele, do you not? Well, I know it was. Of which you have no record? No, sorry. Mr. Nichols, you know we suggest is a complete and utter lie, is it not? No, I'm sorry, he bought it. He did buy it. On the 6th of December, that car was yours. No. You know that it has broken down, had you not? No. And it has been broken down at the wheat sheaf, Mr. Nichols? No. And you had told Mr. Bridge to collect it, had you not? No, sorry. You know that in fact it was collected by Mr. Worms? No. After it had been collected by Mr. Worms, subsequently you told Mr. Worms to get rid of it. That is the truth, is it not? No, not at all. That's completely wrong. Mr. Nichols, money was important in your life, was it not? It's very important in everyone's life. More important in some people's lives than others, I may suggest, Mr. Nichols. I suppose people who have got money, yeah, it's less important to them. You were obsessed with money, were you not? I never had any money particularly, so... You were obsessed with money, were you not? No, I liked earning money. Mr. Nichols, we only have to go back over your relationship with DC Jim regarding the telephone calls that you didn't know were being recorded. When you were talking about purchasing BMK, which is the main ingredient in amphetamine. When you were talking about ripping off Michael Steele and stealing his car with £150,000 worth of drugs in it. There's a clear motive, there's a clear pattern here, Mr. Nichols, that you are a man obsessed with making money, illegally. No, that's not true. And when we look back at that transcript, Mr. Nichols, between you and DC Jim, where you were there talking about stealing Steele's drugs, this was serious to you, was it not? I suppose so. There is no suppose so, because the truth of your seriousness is this, is it not? It is the way you say, we all heard it in this courtroom, quote, it would be like 100 and something odd £1,000. No, it would be more than that, actually. No, it wouldn't. It would be more like 150 grand. You were calculating how much you were going to make, were you not? Yes. That is why this was no joke. This was serious to you, Mr. Nichols. Your brain was ticking over. Whether it was 100,000 or 150,000, was it not, Mr. Nichols? Well, I knew the amounts, yeah. I knew how much money you took abroad. The more illegal, the better. You would have had it, and taken that money away, would you have not, Mr. Nichols? Whether I would have taken it or not, I don't know. You are not saying you suddenly would have had some guilt over taking £150,000, are you, Mr. Nichols? No. Why did you become an informant, Mr. Nichols? Well, several reasons. I'll tell you if you want, because they still wanted me to smuggle and I didn't want to. Who is they? Mr. Steele and Mr. Worms? It started out as a go and get another passport in a sort of friendly way. And it just got stronger and stronger. And then knowing what they'd done to the other three, I thought that sooner or later that was going to happen to me. So I decided that I would inform on them to get them arrested. Yes. First of all, not about the murder, just for smuggling. Yes. And then the day before I was arrested, Jack Worms had a word with me. Do continue, Mr. Nichols. He basically said, you will smuggle, or you'll end up like the other three. He said, you can smuggle with us. And I basically said, you know, I didn't really want to. And he just said to me, you can end up like the others if you don't. You see, Mr. Nichols, What was happening with you and this police officer, as we can see from these tapes, was that you were partners in crime, were you not? No. You were, Mr. Nichols. He was giving you information. You were saying to him that you could sell the BMK, which was the main ingredient for making amphetamine, etc., etc., etc. That was what was going on, was it not? No, not really. This was not a proper informant relationship with a police officer who was straight, was it? I didn't know what he was like when I first met him. Well, you knew he was a corrupt officer, did you not? I didn't know, like I say, what policeman was supposed to be like. You and he were discussing generally how to rip people off. I said I didn't know what policemen were like. I mean, I don't know how they're supposed to act, how they gather information. Mr. Nichols, you know we have been around the clock on this, that even you understand that if you are rewarded by a senior police officer for giving information, you do not expect that police officer, A, to ask for a drink as a reward. You know that, do you not? I suppose so. You know that is fundamentally contrary to any form of principle that any serving police officer should have. You know that, do you not? I didn't give it any thought, I just gave him the money. You see, what was happening between you and that officer was one of mutual protection, was it not? No. What was happening was I got in over my head with him. What was happening was, I suggest, mutual protection, which is why you were so worried when he was arrested. I was worried when I was arrested, because you said in this magistrate's court that you had lost your protection. That is right, is it not? My main worry was... No, it's not right. My main worry was that I was going to be put on remand with those people. You had lost your protection and your protector was protecting you from being arrested or caught for crime, was he not? No, not particularly. That is why you developed the relationship with him, did you not? No. It is rubbish, we suggest, to suggest as you do, that you developed your relationship with this officer in order to have these men arrested. You developed, we suggest, your relationship with that officer because it was for your mutual criminal benefit. That's not true. I did it to get them arrested.